Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for our the KPSA and UniKorea Foundation Conference at the 2025 IPSAR World Congress. Our panel is composed of two sessions, and the title is Strategy for the Korea's Unification in the Era of a New Cold War. Before starting our the panel, and we're gonna invite the UniKorea Foundation, the chairman, Lee Young-sun, Chairman Lee Young-sun, and to hear his the welcoming remarks, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very glad that UniKorea Foundation could co-host this global conference with Association of Political Science in Korea as a plenary session in IPSA World Conference. UniKorea Foundation was established with private resources about 10 years ago as part of efforts to prepare for peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Today, we are witnessing significant changes in the international landscape, such as the emergence of the President Trump's new North Korea policy and the growing strategic rivalry between the US and China. As we consider the prospects for reunification of the Korean Peninsula, we are deeply interested in how these global developments will affect the Korean Peninsula. Therefore, it is highly meaningful for us that renowned scholars from around the world have gathered here today to discuss these issues together. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all participants as well as all presenters who traveled from afar, and in particular to Professor John Eikenberry, Dr. Eric Balmach, and Professor Yoon Young-kwan for presenting the main topics at this seminar. Furthermore, I hope that these seminars will serve as a meaningful platform for promoting peace and reunification on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chairman Lee Young-sun. So now we are going to start our first session, and the session title is The Changing World Strategies of the United States and Peace and Unification in the Korean Peninsula. The first session will be chaired by President of KPSA, Korean Political Science Association, and also the Professor of Seoul National University, Kim Bum-soo. Please.
Thank you for introduction. Yes, my name is Bum-soo Kim. As I introduced, I am serving as the president of Korean Political Science Association. On behalf of Korean Political Science Association, I would like to welcome all of you to participate today's session. As already mentioned, this session and the next section was organized to commemorate the 80th anniversary of Korea liberation from Japan, and additionally 10th anniversary of the UniKorea Foundation. Today, we invite three speakers, presenters, Professor John Eikenberry. Please have a big applause. And Eric Balba, Dr. Eric Balba. And Professor Yoon Young-kwan. And we also invite three discussion. Professor Jeon Jae-sung, Professor Kim Yong-min, Professor Jung Koo-eun, Because time is limited, we will have a 20 minutes presentation from each presenter, and then we will have a 5 minutes discussion for each presentation. Then we will start with Professor John Eikenberry's presentation. Please have your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you all for coming. It's a great opportunity at a very contested, uncertain moment in global politics to talk about peace and stability, unification on the Korean Peninsula. And in some ways, what I want to do, that's a daunting topic, is to pull back and, in some sense, look at the prospects for peace on the Korean Peninsula from the outside in rather than from the inside out, to look at Trump 2.0 and to discuss what that might mean for the global order, the regional order, and then a few comments about what it might mean for the peninsula. But clearly, Trump, the United States, Russia, China, the great power system is going to have a huge impact on the constraints and opportunities for peace going forward in Northeast Asia. And let me just say a little bit about that, focusing primarily on the United States. We're clearly watching a global spectacle. The world's most powerful country is in some sense becoming a revisionist state. It is in some sense in a way that's disorienting to us who have been looking at American foreign policy over the decades, a country that has been at the center of an international order that now is trying to disrupt that order. It usually doesn't happen that way. It usually is great powers on the outside that are trying to knock down the great power or the superpower's order, but now it is the superpower itself which is disrupting, contesting, reorienting global rules and institutions, many of which it has built and presided over for 80 years in trade, security, environment, human rights, and so forth. So we really are in uncharted territory. The U.S. position in the world, its role in providing security, underwriting institutions is clearly in upheaval. Globally, more generally, the multilateral system of institutions there for managing interdependence and fostering global problem solving across the spectrum of issues is also, in some sense, at an historic low. The demand for global governance, for problem solving is going up. The supply based on multilateral structures of cooperation is going down. Moreover, the uncertainty level, perhaps because of that, is also increasing. It's possible for scholars, pundits to make all sorts of different predictions about the future and make credible ones, but the range of possible futures is as wide as it's been, I would argue, since the 1930s. You can think of order or disorder along a wide spectrum that's wider than any vector of scenario contingency that we've seen in many, many decades. In international relations, we are revisiting the most basic issues. Some of us are going back to the most basic questions that we've been grappling with, the books on the shelf that have been gathering dust, the classics of order and disorder. We're reading them again. We're asking those basic questions. What do we know? What do we not know about the existing order? What stock of knowledge do we have? What are the sources of order? Can democracies make a comeback? Can the US and China chart a path to coexistence? And the question that I've been grappling with over the recent years is, what is the future of liberal international order? That is to say, the cooperative organization of an open, rule-based order organized and led by a coalition of liberal democracies. I've been, in some sense, assigned the big question for this panel, and that question might be posed: is the international liberal order dead, or at least dying? And as a good academic, my answer is yes and no. Yes, certain aspects of it, certain levels of it are breaking down, what I'll call the US hegemonic order, but the deeper forces of liberal internationalism and liberal modernity are still alive to fight another day. The Eikenberry law is that the worse things get, the further back into history you have to go to see the upward arc of liberal progress. And now almost every day we have to go further back, certainly to the 1930s, maybe to the 19th century, to see that it's been a long road to get to where we've been. There have been golden eras and catastrophes, near-run things. There is always contestation in international order, always. And if you simply measure the breakdown of order from the 1990s, you're taking an anomalous year and decade, the 1990s, the early post-war period, when things seem to be going the way of liberal progress everywhere. But the longer stretch of history suggests that it's always a struggle between forces of progress and forces of reaction. And indeed, when we ask the question, what is the future of liberal internationalism, we need to remember what it is. And in some ways, there are four basic propositions that I think are still formidable. But if you want to say the liberal order is dead, you have to say that these four convictions or propositions are dead or dying. One is that open trade and exchange, properly managed, is mutually beneficial to all parties. Number two, that international institutions, properly managed, facilitate cooperation. Number three, that liberal democracies do have a comparative advantage, a cooperation advantage for organizing coalitions to reform global architecture. And number four, the most important one, living in a world of growing complex interdependence, under conditions of growing complex interdependence, the costs of states binding themselves to international institutions, and thereby the loss of state autonomy, is less than the gains that are accrued from coordinating your policies. Those four logics, I would argue, are still with us. And so the broader stumbling forward, even in the midst of the disorder that the United States and other countries are creating, is not necessarily leading to a full breakdown of the order. What is breaking down, as I said, is the U.S. liberal hegemonic order. This is the order of 80 years. The U.S. has been at the center of this system, anchored in alliances, including the U.S.-Korean alliance, economic and security bargains with Germany and Japan. We were going to work together on economics and work together on security. U.S. support for public goods, U.S. leadership tied to liberalization of markets. That is to say that the U.S. made itself a friend of countries around the world in that it was dedicated to creating a ruly open system that would liberalize trade and create boats that would all float together. And a certain amount of what we can call strategic restraint. The U.S. would be the most powerful country in the world, but it wouldn't dominate everybody. It would restrain itself and work with others, and importantly, work within multilateral and bilateral institutions. It would tie itself to the order, and countries around the world would tie themselves to the United States. That order is definitely under strain and is breaking down in various ways. The Trump administration clearly is contesting those constraints that are at the heart of this system. And around the world, countries for 80 years have been making long-term strategic commitments with the understanding that that order would still be around, that the United States would, despite all of its vagaries and uncertainties and crazy politics in Washington, would more or less be there. Whether you're a friend or a foe or a country somewhere in between, you knew that there was a hegemonic structure that you would work against or push against, have as a basis for long-term planning. Now that is no longer certain. And so countries everywhere in the world, and this is the most important kind of general summary of what's going on today, countries around the world are having to make decisions. Do we want to ride it out, appease the United States, hope for a better time to come, or do we now begin to jump to a new type of order? And I think it's an open question where countries are going. There are some countries doing one thing other countries doing the other, hedging, preparing plan Bs. All of this is going on. This is what we call world politics in 2025. Now, the Trump administration is clearly at the heart of this, although a lot of the upheaval is caused by larger, deeper forces that we all know about when we talk about why is liberal democracy weakening, or why are governance structures more generally weakening. In that sense, Trump is as much consequence as he is cause, but he is there creating uncertainty. And as he, and indeed as his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has said in his confirmation hearings, that order that I've been describing, the US-led order, is now seen by the Trump administration as not something that benefits the United States, but something that hobbles the United States, that undercuts the United States, that costs more than it benefits. And that is the heart of a kind of revisionist view about America's role in the world. In some ways, it's best to see the United States as, under Trump, as a new CEO of the global liberal corporate order, a kind of almost hostile takeover of this liberal international order. And so Trump is in some sense at the center of it, making decisions like a corporate raider, you might say, looking at a corporation and saying, what do we want to keep? What do we want to sell? What do we want to raise prices on? What do we want to liquidate? Can we monetize relations? Are there new ways of generating assets? How do we renegotiate contracts? This is what I see Trump doing, and the tariff is at the heart of this, as I will mention in a moment. So what are the strategies? Some of the strategies are to sell off what Trump sees as underperforming assets, leaving the WHO, leaving the Paris Climate Accords, rewriting contracts, human rights no longer at the center of the portfolio, monetizing security relations, going back to these security ties, NATO, US, Korea, US, Japan, and saying, we aren't getting enough value, or you might say we aren't getting enough buck for the bang, as opposed to bang for the buck. We want to, in some sense, see more balanced cost sharing in these various alliances. Unbundling bargains is another strategy. It used to be that if you had good security ties with the United States, your economic relations with the United States would follow. That there was a kind of sense that we'll work things out because, after all, we are involved together on the most basic issues of war and peace. But that's no longer the case. The U.S., under Trump, can be continuing, perhaps grudgingly, to provide security, but simultaneously raising tariffs beyond any reasonable level. And then finally, if you are a new CEO of liberal world corporation, you are perhaps looking for ways to sell off all sorts of hegemonic assets. Maybe do a deal with North Korea to liquidate American holdings in the region in favor of some big, beautiful deal. Making deals is at the heart of, I think, what Trump is doing. Now, one more word about Trump before I say something about Northeast Asia. It's very hard to classify what Trump is as a foreign policy actor, what the ideas are. Is there an intellectual core? It's hard to say. Is he a nationalist? Is he an isolationist? Is he a Jacksonian? Is he a populist? These are common labels. He's certainly not an isolationist, and he's certainly not a realist in the normal sense of a restraint realist operator. But he is a kind of nationalist, populist, a kind of illiberal internationalism, or a kind of predatory hegemony where you are using your powerful position to squeeze and bully and look for ways in which you can make America great again. So in this sense, the tariff tool is an extraordinary gift to the Trump administration. Remember that tariff authority was granted to the executive branch because the thought was, coming out of the 1930s, that having Congress control trade policy was a recipe for protectionism, because representatives would try to get protection for industries in their district. So let the executive, who sees the bigger picture, to pursue a free trade system. And of course, for 80 years, that's what happened. But now it's a tool for somebody who says, oh my God, this is great. I don't like what's going on in Brazil. I'm going to raise tariffs 50%. It's a way to use Twitter to destabilize the world and make the world pay attention and do deals with Trump's Washington. So this is where I think we are at. The thread that runs through the Trump administration is the handshake, the bargain, the big, beautiful deal. And so we are all in the midst of trying to figure out how do we cope with that modus operandi in this new era. Just finally, implications for Northeast Asia. Lots of dangers, I think, are growing. I don't think the old coalition, the group of five, the US, Russia, China, South Korea, Japan, the kind of collaborative regional Northeast Asian effort towards putting pressure on North Korea to step back is going to work. Russia is transforming its relationship with North Korea. It's getting stronger and closer. US relations with China are getting weaker and more fraught. These are not working coalitions that can use the old playbook of concerted minilateral pressure. US-ROK relations, I think, are also ripe for conflict. The unfortunate situation is that South Korea is one of those countries that has that double characteristic that it makes it a target, a bullseye for Trump foreign policy invective, and that is it has a trade surplus with the United States, and in various measures of defense spending, it's under measures that the Trump administration has put out there. Lots of uncertainties. Trump himself, that big, beautiful deal with his friend in North Korea. The North Korean leader is the rocket man, and Trump is the tariff man, and we will see if they can come together, but I don't necessarily think that is a deal that we would want to hope for. There are some opportunities. US and China can search for the rules of the game. There is a moment, and it will certainly come, if not during the Trump years, but sometime when there is a more coherent, disciplined relationship between Washington and Beijing, and there could be, in the aftermath of that, a more cooperative effort towards stabilizing and looking for peace terms on the Korean Peninsula. Pragmatic, small steps, focus on preventing miscalculation and risk-taking. In a world turned upside down, those sorts of steps are, in my view, the best we can hope for. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the Professor Eikenberry has a good presentation. He said that the decline of international liberalism, and against this background, he suggested some prospect for the implication, these implications on Korean Peninsula. So we will have a discussion later. Before that, we invite second presentation. Dr. Eric Barber, please have your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and to the organizers for the invitation. I have been assigned the question, moving from the US to Europe, of what the EU/Europe can and or can't do to contribute to peace and security building on the Korean Peninsula. And of course, this debate was renewed, especially after the recent inauguration of the new South Korean president, President Lee Jae-myung, who revived the debate also in Europe about engaging North Korea and how it could be done, or if it is even opportune at the moment, if it's possible at the moment. As you all know, we had a number of informal dialogues all throughout Europe. European Union, certain European Union member states have engaged with North Korea, even when politically the situation was very difficult. This has been something that has been done, and I would say a major part of this, of course, was that Europe was not perceived as a major security player in the region and on the Korean Peninsula. That gave space to Europe to use its diplomatic network also with North Korea to engage on less sensitive issues with North Korea, but also to act repeatedly as a facilitator, to bring the major parties of the conflict together on European soil. This is what Europe has done repeatedly in the past, starting in the 90s, all throughout the 2000s. The question now, of course, is this still realistic with a whole new geopolitical environment, with a whole new North Korea? North Korea is not the same actor it has been since we last engaged with the country in 2018, 2019. But also the European Union changed the way it engages with both the broader Indo-Pacific region, but especially also with the Korean Peninsula. And this is basically my main point. This is very difficult for Europe to do both things at the same time. You can't be let's say, a security actor in the region, and then again use your perceived neutrality more or less to engage with North Korea. And my argument would be that especially after Russia's war against the Ukraine started, the discourse in Europe changed a lot. It brought the North Korea issue much closer to Europe, of course, with North Korea now being the most active supporter of Russia's war against the Ukraine. At the same time, that led to Europe becoming more active, especially on topics which it traditionally has not been very active in the region. And that is, of course, mainly in the field of security and defense. So while, of course, Europe is still not a major player, it has stepped up its security engagement in the region in the previous years tremendously, and especially with regard to South Korea, it became much closer. There's a much closer coordination than previously, also on issues of security, even though not the traditional way of how we perceive security. It's more the non-traditional fields of security we are engaging in. And I think this, on the one hand, of course, was important for Europe, to step up, to make its voice heard, to present its interest also in the region. But on the other hand, like I mentioned before, it complicated its role on the Korean Peninsula to basically re-engage North Korea. So, if traditionally we can say that the Europeans have not been engaged on security matters, on traditional security matters in the region. As you all know, it had mainly been an economic actor in the region. And that began to change starting from around 2016, but of course, especially in 2021, when the European Union published its first Indo-Pacific strategy. But even if we look at the early discourse after this Indo-Pacific strategy has been published, we see that the focus early on was very much on less sensitive issues: connectivity, sustainable and inclusive prosperity, ocean governance, green transition has been the traditional focus. But of course, security and defense was mentioned in the strategy papers. And of course, it has stepped up now its involvement in the Indo-Pacific security architecture as well. But it was mainly done through dialogue mechanisms and not so much through practical engagement of the region. That began to change certainly after 2022, when Russia started its war against the Ukraine. There was a noticeable shift in the EU's, in Europe's regional strategy, which turned much more from economic consideration to strategic ones. And while cooperation on issues like climate change, like healthcare, digital partnership are of course still important for Europe in engaging with the region, we have seen this noticeable shift, and Brussels' strategic approach became more focused on building, for example, more resilient and sustainable global supply chains, strengthening defense and security cooperation with the regional partners. And I think in this regard, 5 changes have been particularly crucial to understand why Europe changed its focus in the previous years. And I think firstly, it's the acknowledgement by European government that we simply cannot separate the conflict theaters in Europe and the Indo-Pacific anymore. Of course, especially with North Korea's support for Russia's war against the Ukraine, the whole North Korea issue moved much closer to Europe. And European governments are now aware that Indo-Pacific strategic dynamics are no longer confined to the region, but have direct consequences for Europe. The growing entanglement, so to say, of security dynamics in Europe and the Indo-Pacific requires a clear strategic vision on the part of the EU. And I think this is where we are, what we are seeing at the moment, that Europe is trying to find its voice here and trying to find its position, also in terms of security. A second point would be that security and some level of military defense engagement in the Indo-Pacific are now seen by many European powers as a necessary entry card, so to say, to protect influence and to realize especially defense industrial interests. And of course, traditionally, this has been done by France and the UK, who had a military presence in the region time and again. Other European powers now have also recognized the need to enhance their engagement here, including through a more persistent presence. We see this from Germany, we see this from Italy in the last couple of years. Just at the moment as we speak, France is participating also in joint missions in the region, in joint training missions in the region. Thirdly, the second Trump administration is unlikely to divert European focus from at least maintaining current levels of defense engagement with the Indo-Pacific partners. I think this was a big concern after Russia started its war against the Ukraine, that Europe basically would pull out of the Indo-Pacific again, would focus its engagement on Europe alone. But what I mentioned before, the recognition that these two conflict theaters are increasingly interlinked makes it important for Europe to stay engaged also in the region. And I think we will not see any change in this going forward. Fourthly, the EU could become more relevant as an Indo-Pacific defense industrial cooperation partner. We see this already through much closer coordination between the Indo-Pacific Four, meaning Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea, with closer cooperation with NATO. And we now see a much closer coordination on defense industrial aspects of our partnership with South Korea. And given the fact that in Europe, defense spending will be increased dramatically in the years to come, we see that especially the defense industrial cooperation will most likely increase throughout the next years. Finally, even though European powers will need to concentrate, of course, their military resources to a much greater extent in the Euro-Atlantic area, European deployments to the Indo-Pacific are most likely to persist. And we see this from current plans, not only from the traditional powers, so to say, of the UK and France, who have traditionally been more engaged in security issues in the region. But like I said before, more and more we see this also with other countries like Germany or Italy. And the background again is that these deployments will be, of course, also be driven by the state's interest in advancing strategic and defense industrial relations with the Indo-Pacific partners, rather than simply supporting US positions as we have seen before. So now what does all of this mean for the EU's role in peace and security building on the Korean Peninsula? Is it realistic for the EU to use its diplomatic network with North Korea for example, to launch a renewed diplomatic initiative towards Pyongyang. We heard that in the last year there were discussions in Europe to resume the political dialogue on the EU level with North Korea. Then, of course, after North Korean troop deployment to Russia, all of these plans were stopped. And this is what we see, this interlinkage. It's extremely difficult for the EU at the moment to launch such an initiative as long as North Korea provides not only weapons but troops to Russia to fight in an active war scenario in Europe. So aside from, I would say, launching immediate diplomatic initiatives with North Korea, there is still, I would say, a lot Europe can do in this regard. But it has to revamp, it has to revise its contemporary North Korea, its current North Korea strategy, which was formulated more than 25 years ago and simply doesn't meet the current geopolitical realities anymore. The acknowledgement that the North Korea issue has moved much closer to Europe, the fact that the security dynamics are increasingly interlinked, increases also the pressure on Europe to act. But of course, it's the discussion of what and how Europe should act vis-à-vis North Korea. And I would say that in the debate we can follow in Brussels, we see there is a political interest in resuming some form of exchange, some form of dialogue with the North Koreans. But at the moment, of course, it's mainly the North Koreans also that are not interested in engaging with the Europeans. We have talked about this previously. The North Korean ambassador to Geneva answered to the question of a possible resumption of dialogue with the answer, "You have nothing to offer what we need right now." And while this is a vast, I would say, overstatement, it still shows us where the North Korean mindset is, meaning that everything they need, or most of the things they need at the moment, they reach through China and particularly Russia to a much less politically sensitive price they are currently paying. So even in this changing geopolitical environment, I would say the Europeans are somehow forced to react because we simply cannot simply sit idle by and watch what is happening. And we still have a diplomatic network. We have with two countries resuming the diplomatic engagement with North Korea through their diplomatic presence in Pyongyang. And this network has to be used because we lack also emergency communication channels with North Korea. And I think that what the EU could and should do is the appointment of an EU special representative focusing not only on North Korea, but on the Korean Peninsula. We only have this so far from one EU member state, and this is something we should discuss more seriously to have a similar position on the European level. And I would say that this would not only help drive the development and implementation of a new North Korea strategy by the EU, but it would ultimately also increase the EU's visibility and advance the bloc's policies and interests in the region. It would also help to raise the awareness in Europe of the stake it has in peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and facilitate coordination, a better coordination between EU member states as well as within the EU. A last point I want to make here is I think that Europe is still not very good in using its existing diplomatic network it has created over the past decades with North Korea, especially traditional diplomatic networks Eastern European countries have with North Korea. And these initiatives, which we saw in the past, have played a crucial role. Let's think about informal dialogues, Track 1.5 dialogues, that are of course not there to solve the big political problems, but they have played a crucial role, especially when official government-to-government channels of communication with North Korea were blocked. And at those particular moments in time, I think that these informal dialogues in Europe can play a crucial role in bringing together the major players, often on the sidelines of those initiatives. Like I said, especially when it's politically not possible or opportune to facilitate some kind of government-to-government dialogue. So while the implementation of a more proactive North Korea strategy is in reality, of course, faced with a number of challenges, the threats posed by North Korea are too important to ignore for the EU and requires Brussels to finally give the issue the high priority in Europe that it deserves. And I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, as Dr. Barba mentioned, the North Korea's involvement in the Ukraine war make the situation difficult. But I hope the Europe, EU, play a significant role in bridging the peace in these areas. Yes. Then we will have a third presentation. Professor Yoon Young-kwan will have a presentation focusing on his title is Trump 2.0's North Korea Diplomacy and Peace on the Korean Peninsula. Yes, please have your presentation.
Actually, I slightly changed my topic of the paper title. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And first, let me express my sincere thanks to the organizers of this panel. Professor Kim Bum-soo, Chairman of Korea Political Science Association, and Dr. Lee Young-shun, Chairman of UniKorea Foundation, and also Professor Kim Eui-young, Chairman of the Organizing Committee of 2025 IPSA Conference. And they have brought us together for such a timely and important discussion. And it is my privilege to join this panel and to share some thoughts on one of the most important and urgent strategic challenges facing the Korean Peninsula. Let me start with the main takeaway of my talk. South Korea must significantly revise its external strategy in response to major changes in U.S. foreign policy under Trump 2.0, especially the implications for North Korea diplomacy and alliance management. This is more than a tactical adjustment. It calls for a fundamental strategic rethink of Seoul's position amid rapidly evolving global and regional landscapes. In fact, the critical reassessment has been delayed by 6 months of domestic political turmoil following former President Yoon's declaration of martial law last December. In today's remark, I will explain first how Trump 2.0 differs from his first term. Second, what this means for U.S.-North Korea relations. And third, the emerging risks for South Korea. And finally, what kind of strategy Seoul needs to adopt going forward. Let me start with a big picture. During his first term, President Trump was unable to implement his America First foreign policy. Largely new to government, he surrounded himself with establishment Republicans, so-called adults in the room, who sought to moderate his instincts. But in his second term, he is now politically experienced, ideologically confident, and much less constrained by internal opposition. This time, Trump is pushing his America First doctrine more deliberately and with fewer checks. One clear example came during his February meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky. During his conversation with him, he told, "You have no cards" 6 times. And this kind of language reflects his core worldview, a raw, transactional realism where power matters much more than norms, rules, or alliances. So what's behind this sharper version of America First? There may be many factors, but one of the major ones is fiscal pressure. The US national debt has reached nearly $29 trillion, almost equal to the amount of US GDP. And entitlement spending on Medicare and Social Security is rising fast. From the Trump administration's perspective, global military commitments are no longer affordable. This means America is retrenching and expecting more from allies. That's why we are seeing a strategy of prioritization. Trump is not withdrawing from the world, but he's making hard choices. Europe and the Middle East are being told to take care of themselves. The focus is China, with everything else, including North Korea, becoming the secondary matter. This framework is being led by figures like Elbridge Colby, now Undersecretary of Defense, who has long argued that US forces should shift toward deterring China, while allies take over more regional responsibilities. On the Korean Peninsula, this means first reassessing the role of US forces in Korea. Second, considering partial troop withdrawals. I hope partial, not entire. And third, the treating North Korea as a manageable, not urgent threat. So the old alliance assumptions are being replaced by more narrow cost-benefit calculations. Now let's turn to how this strategic shift is playing out in Trump's approach to North Korea. Trump's first-term diplomacy was already unusual. He preferred top-down, leader-to-leader engagement, meeting Kim Jong-un 3 times, rather than letting working-level talks set the stage. This aligned with Kim's own style. He never trusted his negotiators with real authority anyway. Trump also broke with past presidents by treating improvement of political relations as a potential starting point rather than a reward for denuclearization. But the Hanoi summit in 2019 collapsed because Kim demanded major sanctions relief for dismantling only Yongbyon. And the US countered with a demand for complete denuclearization without a step-by-step plan. And Trump walked out, and the process stalled. Since then, the strategic context has changed dramatically, and not in Washington's or Seoul's favor. North Korea has massively expanded its nuclear and missile arsenal, and it is now estimated to have about 50 nuclear warheads, tactical nuclear weapons, solid fuel ICBMs, submarine-launched missiles, hypersonic glide vehicles, and possibly even nuclear-powered submarines in development. Even more even more importantly, North Korea has entered into a military alliance with Russia, supplying half the artillery used by Russian forces in Ukraine, and possibly deploying tens of thousands of troops or workers in coming years. In exchange, Pyongyang has received fuel, food, and access to advanced military technologies. With support from both Russia and China, Kim Jong-un does not seem to have strong incentive to return to denuclearization talks. In February 2025, KCNA officially called denuclearization, quote, absurd and outdated, unquote. So where does that leave Trump? Paradoxically, he may still want to restart dialogues for three reasons. First, to limit ICBM and nuclear submarine developments, which could soon threaten the US mainland. Second, to cut off North Korea's support for Russia, weakening Moscow in Ukraine and freeing US resources for the China challenges. And finally, to create a legacy achievement. Trump may still dream of a Nobel Peace Prize. But that creates a serious risk. Trump may pursue a narrow deal from an America First perspective, one that protects US homeland security while leaving South Korea exposed. So let's consider what such a deal might look like. It could include a freeze on North Korean ICBM test or nuclear test, and possibly dismantlement of some ICBMs, and a moratorium on fissile material production, and a halt to arms transfers to Russia and terrorist groups. In return, President Trump could offer relaxation of sanctions, a partial pullback of US troops, or reduced joint exercises. And here's the key concern for Seoul. South Korea's security concerns, like a short and medium-range missile threats, might be sidelined. There are already some signals. President Trump has referred to North Korea as, quote, a nuclear state, unquote. His nominee for Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, echoed that label. And the Pentagon is reportedly reviewing the withdrawal of 4,500 troops. At the recent Shangri-La dialogue, South Korea was barely mentioned. Instead, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth highlighted Japan, Australia, and the Philippines as America's core group of Indo-Pacific allies. These developments raise the prospect of a worst-case scenario. Trump may strike a risky deal with Kim that achieves little for South Korea while treating the alliance as negotiable. So what should South Korea do in response? Let me offer 5 urgent policy recommendations. First, accelerate a strategic dialogue with Washington. South Korea must launch direct and regular strategic consultations with the US as soon as possible. These talks must go beyond formal alliance rituals. Seoul needs to engage Washington on how it views China, what its red lines are on North Korea, and what role it expects South Korea to play in regional contingencies. It's worth remembering that Colby, sometime before his appointment as Undersecretary of Defense, warned that South Korea cannot remain neutral between the United States and China. That's not a fringe view in my view. It reflects a growing consensus in Washington. Second, strengthen defense capabilities for more strategic autonomy. South Korea must move toward greater self-reliance in national defense. That means increased defense spending from 2.3% of GDP to at least 3% in a few years. Increased defense budget may be used for investment on such areas as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems, and warfighting capabilities through AI-enhanced drones. Seoul should also consider renegotiating the US ROK civil nuclear agreement to allow limited reprocessing and enrichment, not to build weapons, but to signal deterrence and secure strategic autonomy. Third, deepen strategic cooperation with Japan and other democracies. Given growing uncertainties in the US commitment, South Korea and Japan must coordinate more closely. Both are democratic allies of the United States committed to preserving the rules-based international order. Both confront threats from North Korea, and both must navigate the uncertainties of Trump administration's America First doctrine. This includes reviving the 2+2 dialogues, aligning on contingency planning, and strengthening trilateral cooperation with the United States. At the same time, Seoul should broaden ties with India, the EU, Australia, and Canada to build resilience and reduce overdependence on any single partner. Fourth, develop a clear bargaining strategy with the United States. Seoul must also devise clear, pragmatic scenarios outlining what it can offer the United States and what it expects in return. South Korea possesses considerable industrial strengths that align with President Trump's vision of making America great again. This includes world-class shipbuilding, defense, civil nuclear energy, and semiconductor industries, etc. So the Korean government should prepare concrete policy packages that can support US priorities while advancing its own security interest. Finally, reduce risk by reopening inter-Korean communication. Kim has labeled the South a hostile state. Nevertheless, it remains worthwhile for Seoul to pursue low-profile engagement with the North and to re-establish communication channels. Reopening such channels can help prevent minor incidents from escalating into major conflict due to misunderstanding, miscalculation, or overreaction. Gestures like South's suspension of propaganda broadcast in last month and the North's prompt reciprocal response represent a promising start. Furthermore, the United States and South Korea might explore the possibility of jointly developing North Korea's natural resources, particularly rare earth minerals. President Trump is known for his interest in resource diplomacy, and he may find such an initiative appealing. If the war in Ukraine winds down and Russia's strategic posture shifts, this kind of a Big Bang economic initiative could become a compelling option for all parties involved and potentially serve as a non-military deterrent to nuclear escalation and contribute to long-term peace on the Korean Peninsula. In conclusion, under Trump's second term, the U.S. is embracing a more transactional, prioritized America First foreign policy, one that sees alliances not as sacred but as conditional. The risk is real. Washington may pursue a symbolic diplomatic success with Pyongyang that weakens deterrence and leaves South Korea more vulnerable. But this is also a moment of opportunity, I think. South Korea can rise to the occasion, recalibrate its strategy, deepen regional partnerships, strengthen its defense, and assert a more autonomous and confident role in shaping peace on the Korean Peninsula. The consolidation of peace will not come from wishful thinking or nostalgia for past alliances. It will come from strategic realism, resilience, and adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you. So the Professor Yoon examined the U.S. policy toward North Korea and recommend 5 policy South Korean government should take. Thank you very much. So we have 3 presentations. The first presentation focus on global level. So the Professor John Eikenberry examined the decline of liberalism at the global level and has some examined the implication of this global trends on Korean Peninsula. And secondly, Dr. Eric Barba, he examined Europe's role, especially in bridging the Europe and making peace in the region. And he argued that Europe's policy toward North Korea is a kind of a critical engagement. So he used the term critical engagement. And finally, Professor Yoon made a suggestion for policy suggestion. Then we will have 3 discussions. First, Professor Jeon Jae-sung will have a discussion focusing on Professor John Eikenberry's presentation. Please have your discussion. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity. Let me go through each point. I have only 5 minutes. Regarding Professor Eikenberry's perspective, I deeply resonate with the view that the U.S. has played a key role in establishing and sustaining the liberal international order for the last 80 years, and I share the hope that this order can be restored in the future. I also find that the argument highly compelling in academic terms, particularly because it goes beyond the actions of President Trump administration to raise structural issues such as the crisis of modernity, geopolitical rivalry, and liberal democracy, thereby offering a more refined analysis of current developments. First issue is about regarding regarding overall U.S. hegemonic policy. President Trump has repeatedly claimed that the U.S. allies have not treated America fairly in the past and have pursued selfish policies that infringe upon U.S. interests. So President Trump says allies ripped off the U.S., taking advantage of the U.S. leadership so far, dealing U.S. unfairly. This narrative appears to have a strong appeal to an American public weary of the heavy costs of global hegemony. And allies have second thought. Have we been really free riding on the U.S. In an unreciprocal manner? However, I believe that maintaining the liberal international order has also required considerable followership and contributions from allied nations. South Korea, in particular, has been one of the countries that has consistently supported and implemented U.S. diplomatic strategies. In this regard, I would like to ask how the United States, as a hegemonic power, assess its strategic engagement from the perspective of costs and benefits. So in international relations, there has been a scholarly debate if the imperialists, for example, in 19th century, the English domination of India, for example, has been profitable, producing net gains for those imperialists. Likewise, does the U.S. hegemonic leadership produced any net gains for the U.S.? I think U.S. has gained some structural long-term interest from that hegemonic leadership, so we need to have some kind of academic appreciation of what allies have done to maintain and support U.S. leadership so far. So how far the contributions of allies and long-term structural benefits of alliance politics discussed within U.S. domestic discourse. The second issue is about the future of the international liberal order. Given that President Trump is serving a single term, we are going to have a new administration in 3.5 years. So I believe that the liberal international order is unlikely to be simply restored to its previous form. Rather, it will need to evolve. So what kind of framework should a new type of liberal international order have, if we can, after the presidency of President Trump? As new global challenges such as climate change and growing uncertainty in the security order intensify, it seems increasingly difficult for the United States to provide sufficient international public goods alone and exercise leadership unilaterally. In this context, I believe there is a growing need for a new form of collective leadership, one in which authority and responsibility are somehow shared among major powers within the liberal bloc. So the U.S. might will a different type of leadership to lead this leading group, not lead the whole world, because there will be a lot of demands from the whole international society about the international public goods. Furthermore, the liberal order should be reorganized in a more democratic manner. While the previous liberal order was a very good one, a liberal in nature, but it was not necessarily democratic in its operation. Liberal order tried to promote liberal democracy in many countries. However, in essence, the order itself was not democratic in the sense that it permits universal participation, permitting the voices from all different kinds of especially weak participants in international society. So while the previous liberal order was liberal in nature, I believe that democratic principles must play a greater role in governing the international system in the future. And I would very much appreciate your views on this point. Third, which is about financial basis of the liberal international order. So I want to raise a question about President Trump's economic policy. We've been criticizing President Trump's tariff policy, but in some sense, it is understandable because U.S. currently faces a national debt exceeding 100% of its GDP, with interest payments surpassing even defense spending. So we are talking about, the Ferguson limit, following the British history in the 18th century. While such debt might be understood as a necessary cost of sustaining hegemony, the administration's coercive demands for increased allied contributions can also be interpreted in light of this fiscal burden. So how can we cooperate in solving this problem? Therefore, I believe that the economic foundation for maintaining the liberal international order will become a vital topic, not just for policy, but also as academically for future research. So in line with many arguments, especially the near Ferguson these days, the sustainability of U.S. hegemony may ultimately depend on whether it can be accompanied by transformative technological innovation. So actually Ferguson said that with a rapid increase of productive capacity of the U.S., that's the only way that U.S. can maintain its hegemonic leadership. Without that increase, it will be very hard for the U.S. can do that. So the question is, can we have liberal international order, not in a hegemonic fashion, when U.S. is facing and also cannot solve this financial problem of this order? I have a question about North Korea, but in time, for the benefit of time, I have to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we will have a discussion from Professor Yong-min Kim, focusing on Dr. Eric Barber's presentation.
Hello. Dr. Eric Ballas presented a comprehensive and very rigorous analysis of EU-North Korea relations spanning almost a period of nearly 30 years, and that he divided EU-North Korea relations into 3 phases: active engagement, critical engagement, and active pressure, and provide highly useful analytical framework for understanding changes in European policy toward Korean Peninsula. And he, in his paper, he was working mostly on the critical engagements period, 2002 to 2015. And during this period, the EU endeavors to maintain delicate equilibrium between mounting pressure and sustain the political engagement in aftermath of second North Korean nuclear crisis. And in his paper, Dr. Eric's assertion that critical engagement strategy has been unsuccessful and also well supported by his evidence, and the assertion that this approach has resulted in passive and reactive EU policies toward Korean Peninsula, thereby further diminishing of EU's role in Korean Peninsula security issues, and it's evidenced by the long-term 30 years of history between South Korea and EU. And however, moreover, the challenges currently facing South Korea and EU is completely changed, because namely military cooperation between Russia and North Korea in Ukraine, and then its impact on European security is urgent matters that are ongoing right now. And the observation that North Korea has become the most active supporter of Russia's war in Ukraine right now serves to illustrate the European Korean Peninsula security dynamics completely change after the Ukraine war. And the relationship between Europe and South Korea, which has been characterized by very certain distance. We are close friend, not close friend, but we are not literally close. So it's now facing another kind of challenge to connection between that Russia and North Korea has made. As a discuss, I want to try to ask some question to Dr. Eric. That he identified 3 key factors that has contributed to evolution of EU policy in relation to North Korea. And it has 3 main issues: the country's North Korea's nuclear test, development of long-range missiles, and also EU was very focused on the human rights situation in North Korea. First of all, I want to ask you, what are Dr. Eric's thoughts on impact on policy change in the US can make EU policy decisions? And furthermore, what is impacted on positive on subject in recent change in European domestic politics, like, for example, Brexit, the rise of far-right parties in Germany, France, Italy? Then what is its influence in EU's policies? For second question, even though comprehensive sanctions has been placed for over a decade, and evidently it has no great effect on North Korea, and North Korea has, with sanctions, they still make a nuclear power, and does the EU continues sanction and this approach? It's kind of represented case of past dependency on EU's policy. And because Russia and China has effectively neutralized UN sanctions inside UN, and with this coming of Trump 2.0 era, giving rise to argument that in the UN and other international organization is powerless at the moment. And does this not render the EU's emphasis on multilateral sanctions? Is it powerful? Is it still useful, or is it powerless at the moment? And third one, as you mentioned in presentation, we should consider that in the wake of Russia-Ukraine war and the military cooperation between North Korea and Russia, what measures can EU adopt in response to this kind of new geopolitical landscape? And I sincerely worrying that it is important to consider whether EU has any incentives that would be attractive to North Korea. As you mentioned, it is very difficult to find it at the moment, but I want to give you little bit more time to add something what EU can offer in the future to the North Korea. For the final question, you criticized EU's passive and reactive policy towards Korean Peninsula, yet it is submitted that this may in fact reflect the EU's practical limitations in the international relations. And the Korean Peninsula is geographically very distant to the Europe. Even London Seoul has 16 hours, 18 hours flight right now. And there are fundamental limitations that EU can influence direct to the Korean Peninsula by security. And what is your thought in this matter? Now we have a lot of close relationship with the defense, weapons industry, etc., etc. And in conclusion, as a discount, I found Dr. Eric's presentation is to be excellent analysis and clearly demonstrate the change and limitations of the EU's policy toward North Korea and Korean Peninsula. I concur with his evaluation that contemporary geopolitical changes are characterized by both novel challenges and opportunity to the EU and Korea, both of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. I'm wondering how Dr. Eric Barber respond to his questions. Then we will have a third discussion. Professor Jung Gu-yeon, please have your discussion.
Thank you, Professor Kim. And thank you, Professor Yoon, for your comprehensive and very insightful presentations. And you covered a lot of topics, actually, from Trump administration to North Korea. And I have 3 questions and comments. First one is about United States. As Professor Eikenberry and Professor Yoon's presentation demonstrate, labeling Trump not administration, Trump is the kind of fundamental step to analyze his foreign policy and predict how the international system will evolve in the future. And as many of our presenters have discussed, certainly he is not a realist as a restraint power, but it seems like he is retrenching while throwing away the strategic restraint, which Professor Eikenberry mentioned in his book, is sustained in 80 years. So whatever the label is, as a result, what we are seeing is the U.S. is retrenching chaotically into Indo-Pacific, especially for China, from Europe and Middle East and many other global South countries. And as your presentation mentioned, Professor Yoon, that a current retrenchment without actually strategic restraint is kind of converging into a situation where we observe multipolarity or many different parts of spheres of influence. The idea has been suggested initially by India, China, Russia, but now it becomes kind of a reality. It used to be a narrative, but now it becomes a reality these days. If that's the case, then how do you see that this East Asia will be incorporate or kind of evolve into different spheres of influence? And what is the kind of suggestion for you that how South Korea will evolve, adapt to this reality? That's my first question. Second question is about North Korea. In your presentation, you mentioned that the worst case scenario is this. United States diminishes emphasis on North Korea's denuclearization, and U.S. accept North Korea as a nuclear state, while focus more on nuclear reduction and arms control rather than complete denuclearizations, and U.S. Withdraw U.S. forces out of Korean Peninsula. We all agree that this is the worst case scenario, but given that and considering the current polarizations of South Korean political landscape, do you think this could be a bipartisan North Korea policy in the future? That's my second question. And third question is related to another North Korea policy, which is the two-state doctrine that Kim Jong-un mentions in 2023. And the doctrine has been controversial during the 2023. He actually mentioned it, but it becomes more problematic given that if United States or if South Korea kind of accept the two-state doctrine and evolve its North Korea policy. And as you know, however, the two-state doctrine mentions that two Koreas in a hostile relationship at war. And according to this two-state doctrine, North Korea is developing its military capability and take more hostile military strategy. And this attitude has been emboldened by military support and economic support by Russia at this moment. Then you suggest that we have to resume our dialogue. Of course, it is important to have a dialogue and a communication channel with North Korea. But what could be the incentive we can actually resume our dialogue with North Korea? You mentioned in your presentations the economic incentive, considering North Korea's interest in kind of tourism and economic industrial complex. But that formula, in other words, trading, economic interest, and denuclearization's formula has been already tested in Moon Jae-in administration and in the before as well. And it didn't really doesn't really work, and it didn't serve as a non-military deterrent to nuclear development and escalation in the past. So, considering this past experience, do you think still this economic kind of incentive can serve as a catalyzers in resuming our dialogue with North Korea? So that's my third question, and thank you for discussion.
Okay, thank you for this discussion and questions. Then we will have a brief response from the presenters, three presenters, one by one, and then we will open the question to the floor. So maybe 3 minutes or 5 minutes response is okay? Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Professor Chun, wonderful questions and ones I will continue to think about after this panel. But very quickly, I agree with you that one of the aspects that we need to think about in the context of Trump 2.0 and the shakeup of the American post-war hegemonic system is, in some sense, we have to go back to zero-based budgeting and ask questions: what are the value of institutions and relationships, things that we thought we understood had value and thought everybody might agree upon what the values are, alliances, multilateral commitments. In some sense, Trump is forcing us to relitigate, to remeasure, to reevaluate these institutions. And do we really think they're worth what we pay for them? What are their values? I think most of us, I certainly, as someone who's been studying these institutions for years, indeed decades, think that Trump is totally misvaluing valuing these institutions. The value assignments are way misplaced, but the argument has to be made. You have to make the case for alliances, for what you spend on them and how you think about the larger value, the kind of system of relationships, the milieu, the ecosystem of cooperative democracies that has a kind of value because it creates a circuitry, a set of networks, ready partners, the ability to convince countries to work with you, to bandwagon rather than balance against you. Those are sort of diffuse, long-term benefits of a certain way of organizing the world, a liberal internationalist way, that Trump doesn't measure in his valuation, and I think we need to make the case if we think that in fact those values exist. What does a future, a reformed liberal international order mean? What are its characteristics? I think this is really an agenda. It's not too early to prepare for the next cycle of history. Trump will not be there forever, and I think liberals and internationalists and those who support this cooperative order of the sort that we've lived through all these decades need to be creative and rethink. I do think we need to try to expand the coalition, alter the logic and the coalitional features, the nature of leadership, diversify the leadership. There are proposals out there for the G7 to become the D10, which would include more countries in a kind of consortium of leadership. And I think that in some ways the ultimate value of a liberal international order is that it provides strategies of cooperation to deal with 21st century problems of complex interdependence that the alternative systems and visions of international order don't provide. So how do we create institutions that can do problem solving in areas that we think really have to be solved for human betterment to proceed? On finance, yes, I think we have to go back to what the costs are for extended military commitments, large budgets. The debt is growing. But I would say it's not simply a question of balancing capabilities and assets at home and responsibilities abroad. It's also rethinking the distribution of burdens within societies like the United States. I was shocked the other day to read that the three richest Americans, Musk, Zuckerberg, and Bezos, have wealth equal to the lower 50% of the American population, which is about, 130 million people, equal to 3 people. So there's something wrong there. When we redo the finances, I think it's going to have to entail also redistributing the tax burdens so that the extraordinary wealth that's been created in this last period is put in a position where it can support the institutions that made that wealth creation possible. And we are simply in a dysfunctional system where that has not yet been accomplished. So there's much work to be done, as you suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we will have the response from the Dr. Eric Barber.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. Let me start with the sanctions issue. This is extremely important for the Europeans, and we saw that even after Russia vetoed the extension of the mandate of the panel of experts, which basically led to a standstill of supervision of the UN Security Council resolutions against North Korea, we saw that the main driver of sanctions, so to say, now moved outside of the Security Council to more or less a coalition of the willing. And this can, of course, not replace the mandate which the previous sanctions committee and the panel of experts had before. But we also saw that the UN Security Council resolutions didn't address major issues in their sanctions profile against North Korea due to Chinese and Russian veto. For example, not a single UN Security Council resolution addressed North Korea's cyber activities, which now play a crucial role in financing North Korea's weapons programs. So this will continue because it's extremely important to the Europeans, especially given the fact that North Korean cyber operations are also a direct threat to Europe, with basically daily attacks on European defense companies, for example. So this will continue, even though, of course, in a different matter, so to say. Does the EU have incentives on North Korea? Difficult to say. I would say under the current circumstances, of course, we simply, similar to South Korea, if North Korea is not willing to engage, there is not much we can do. But we should not overestimate, I would say, the current cooperation between North Korea and Russia in a way that it's not a given that this will continue to the degree it does at the moment once the war in the Ukraine ends. I'm pretty convinced that the partnership continues, but I would doubt that Russia will support North Korea to the degree it does currently, simply for the fact that Russia, of course, at the moment also needs a lot from the North Koreans, and the North Koreans are willing to give that. So do we have incentives once this war stops? I would say we will most likely have incentives, because even though the support by Russia and China is there to the North Koreans, it's not like the Chinese always say, we give them enough to survive but not enough to prosper. And this, I would say, is certainly in the long term, economic issues are certainly incentives the Europeans could play out much more smartly than they have before. On the EU's passive stance on North Korea, you know, I would say there are fundamental limitations on security cooperation when it comes to the EU's role on North Korea. And what I said initially, you know, the EU can't have it both ways. You can't strengthen your role as a security actor in the region clearly on the side of South Korea and Japan, Australia, New Zealand and other actors, and at the same time assume the role of a more or less neutral mediator. Both things simply do not go together. So I would say we still have a lot to offer to support also South Korea, South Korea's new administration, but under current geopolitical circumstances, it's extremely difficult that the EU would, for example, propose a unilateral initiative on North Korea. Under current circumstances, is highly unlikely.
Thank you for your response. Then finally, the Professor Yoon, please have your response to the questions.
Okay, thank you for your questions. And first, regarding the issue of spheres of influence, I think that's a kind of important topic among international scholars nowadays. Even though President Trump has been focusing on China as the sole main target of the United States, we don't know what is his view on the end state of U.S.-China relationship. He does not like wars, and even though the current policy is targeting China mainly, someday in the future he may prefer a big deal with China. We cannot exclude that kind of possibility. And already there are some kind of remarks by key policymakers of the U.S. government, such as Marco Rubio. He emphasized the importance of putting more priority, more importance on U.S. diplomacy towards South America in his columns a few months ago. And that signifies that U.S. policy is, also interested, key U.S. policymakers are interested in consolidating America, South and North, as a U.S. sphere of influence. And he may make a compromise with Xi Jinping. Why don't you be a regional leader or hegemon in East Asia? And we will take care of American affairs. Another version of, Monroe Doctrine of 1823. In that kind of situation, I don't know what will be the fate of the Korean Peninsula or South Korea. Will it belong to Chinese spheres of influence? Will President Trump regard South Korea as a kind of, belonging to Chinese spheres of influence, or will he regard South Korea as one important country belonging to American sphere of influence? Or third way, some kind of, a third way in new strategic landscape? I have no idea at all. It is very difficult question. But the reason why I emphasize the importance of having much close coordination and alignment with Japan is exactly because I am keeping this in my mind. Possibility of future spheres of influence. Japan may face the same dilemma in that kind of situation. And that's exactly why I also emphasize to increase Korea's defense budget. We need to depend much more on ourselves rather than any other country in the future. That does not mean that we need to cut our relationship with the United States or something like that. But I think that's an important topic for South Korean policymakers and most South Koreans to think about, because there's a possibility. We cannot exclude, the possibility of President Trump pursuing spheres of influence politics. The second question is whether, if I understood your question correctly, whether South Koreans will be able to form a bipartisan agreement on North Korea policy. My brief answer is probably yes, as the result of past experiences of a few decades. There was, strong, kind of confrontation between progressives and conservatives, but both camps' policies, North Korea policies, didn't succeed. And as a result, I think most Koreans began to think about the right policy toward North Korea may be so-called principled engagement. If you don't engage, the tension will rise rapidly on the Korean Peninsula. If you, if you put too much emphasis on engagement without considering some kind of principles, your North Korea policy will lose international legitimacy because it will be against international norms such as human rights, denuclearization, or market principle, etc. So my feeling is that South Koreans have become, convergent on this issue, North Korea policy, in recent years. Third question, economic approach. Yes, it didn't work in the past, And I am talking about this taking initiative with some conditions. First, I'm assuming there should be a new strategic landscape as the result of Kim Jong-un's thinking that he has finally completed his nuclear program. So he may think that it's now time to focus on economy. That's one condition. And the second question is that the source of additional income for North Korea, that is the Ukraine war, ended. If the Ukraine war ends in coming months or years, there will be no additional financial income for North Korea. And the third, Kim Jong-un may respond to President Trump's approach and President Trump's initiative for resumption of new dialogue, and that may provide a new strategic environment where both South Korea and the United States may take that kind of initiatives together. So it is based on some conditions, and those conditions, all the conditions, may have to be met before we pursue this kind of economic initiative. Thank you.
Thank you. So we complete 3 presentation and the discussion and response, but we still have 5 minutes left. So so let's open to the floor. If you have questions, please raise your hand, and maybe 1 or 2 questions we can have. Then, so many questions, but yes, first set. And maybe here's 2 or 3, yes, 2, and second, third question, 3 questions, and 4 questions together, yes.
Hello, my name is Marta Hensiak. I'm a consul of Poland in Seoul. I first want to thank Dr. Erich Balbach for his valuable observations on EU-North Korea relations. But I also let myself to have 1 comment and 1 question to Dr. Balbach. I first want to totally agree with your conclusion that EU relations with North Korea have never been so difficult as they are right now, since Pyongyang made this political decision to support Russia in its illegal aggression against Ukraine. However, I want to perhaps highlight, maybe in more detail, 1 avenue that the EU still has, about which we should not forget. Because within the last 20-30 years, all the way until COVID pandemic, EU countries managed to build a network of 7 diplomatic missions in Pyongyang. Now, as you mentioned, we have only 2 countries, EU countries, that are diplomatically back in North Korea after the pandemic. And I cannot fail to mention that those countries are Sweden and my country, Poland. So that's a crucial channel of communication that we have not entirely cut despite COVID. A rare case of diplomatic channel that remained open, even despite in theory this should not happen, because we have North Korea supporting Russia so strongly. At the same time, Poland, the biggest buyer of South Korean, US hardware in Europe, it should not happen. But what we should wish for now, in my opinion, is more EU member states returning to Pyongyang. So this also includes wishing to see your country, Dr. Balbach, Germany, back in Pyongyang as soon as possible. But my question is to you, Dr. Balbach, what would you advise in general, albeit practical terms, to decision makers in the EU and in EU member state capitals, what they should do to make it happen? How to talk to North Koreans going forward, despite general circumstances are so difficult, and we all agree to that. Thank you.
Okay, then second questions? Yes.
My question is for Professor John Ikenberry. I agree with the four Ikenberry laws that you have put forward, but I would add, based on the modeling I've been doing on geopolitics, I'd add that it would end up as a club-based conditional liberal order. But my question is, how do you see the role of China stepping up in this vacuum? My initial result says that China is hedging, it's still reluctant to step up in the vacuum left by the United States.
Okay, then third questions?
Thank you very much. I'm Amir from Australia University, and I have a question for Prof. Ikenberry. Restraint and restraining has been the fundamental of U.S. leadership. With the recent tariff and missile over Iran, we can see that restraint and restraining allies is no longer the basis of that. So what is the value proposition that U.S. is offering to sustain this leadership, and whether you think material capability and path dependence is sufficient to sustain that in the near future? Thank you.
Okay, then because time limited, we stop here, and then we will ask some response answers from the two presenters. So who will do first? Dr. Eric Balba, you first. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much for your remark, and I have to say I fully agree with you that the reopening of the first two embassies now is a crucial step forward in re-engaging with the North Koreans, or at least opening crucial channels of communication. When it comes to Germany, it has been very difficult in the past. After Germany joined the UN command, the North Koreans were everything but happy about that. And we are currently not on the list of those countries that are allowed to resume or reopen their embassy. We have a new government in Germany, and things start to change a little bit. We see this with the provision of visas to North Korean diplomats to come to the embassy in Berlin, which is a crucial change compared to our previous government. So things are moving, but at the moment I don't see Germany reopening the embassy, at least not in the next couple of months, because yes, we need the agreement, of course, also we need both the political will on the side of Germany and, of course, on the side of the North Koreans to allow them to come back. And this has been a little bit more complicated in the past months. But I would, as I mentioned, I would say that we still have these communication channels through the embassies are still a very crucial step forward, and I would advise, of course, those European countries with a diplomatic presence in Pyongyang to at least try to reopen these embassies. But as I mentioned, it's politically difficult at the moment for some countries, especially domestically, to push this through, and we need ultimately also the agreement from the North Koreans.
Yeah, very briefly, I just wanted to say that one thing I will remember about this panel is Professor Yoon's presentation and his 5 recommendations for South Korea. And what, in effect, he's saying is that this is an uncertain time. There's a great deal of anxiety around the world. The U.S. is in some sense, throwing up its own post-war role for renegotiation. The world is unclear how the U.S. will act, but that is a way of, in some sense, creating an opportunity for states to think about plan Bs, to rethink their relationships, to try to regain some autonomy over their choices, to not be vulnerable to uncertainty from the center of the system. So there's a creative moment, I think, that is there, although it may be pursued out of a certain sense of reluctance and regret. China is an interesting country, to come to that question. It is an opportunity. If China doesn't see this as its moment, then I'm not sure when that moment will ever arrive. The other rival great power is ceding a great deal of soft power and global leadership and authority. China has an opportunity to articulate its vision of the international system. But what makes China, I think, somewhat ambivalent and reluctant is that the order that Trump is disturbing is an order that China has benefited greatly from over the last years, over the last 40 years. It's that order, the so-called period of Pax Americana, that allowed China to have its best decades in 2 millennia, defined in terms of economic growth and economic opportunity for Chinese people. So there must be some ambivalence about letting go of that open, rule-based, market-oriented system. Then finally, restraint. I think there is a really interesting question here for scholars of international relations, but certainly for policymakers. If the moment comes when a different American president wants to return to a strategy of hegemonic restraint, where all things are not negotiable, where everything is not a bargain, where everything is not transactional, where agreements are, in fact, as Professor Yun said, sacred, how do you reestablish that sense of restraint? And I worry about that, but I think it's going to be something that a future president is going to think about, and it probably will take a great deal of time for the world, the U.S. and its partners, to find a way to rebuild their relationships, because these things are very hard to do and take years to establish in the first place.
Oh, thank you for your answers. If time left, then we will continue the discussion and Q&A. But as you know, we already passed the 5 minutes, so it's time to wrap up this session. Thank you very much for the presentation and discussion, and thank you very much for joining our panel. It's the end of this panel, and maybe in 10 minutes, maybe the second session will start. Thank you.
Thanks for the panelists, and let's give them a big hand. Yeah. So this is the end of the first panel, and the second panel will be starting at the 5:03 p.m. panel, and then I will serve as actually chair. So I will move to the table and then proceed to the second panel. Okay, this is Ji-Hwan Hwang, Professor of International Relations at the University of Seoul. And then I'm chairing the second session of our conference, the KPSA and the UniKorea Foundation, the joint conference, and the IPSA 2025 IPSA World Congress conference. And then session 2 is about international relations on the Korean Peninsula in the era of a new Cold War. We have 3 presentations and 2 discussants. So let me introduce the panelists. The first, the Professor Robert Sutter. Sutter is the professor of international relations in George Washington University. And the second presenter is Professor Nishino Junya from the Keio University in Japan. And our third the presenter is Professor Ma Sang-yoon, the Catholic University of Korea. And then there are 2 designated discussants, Professor Im Eun-jung from Gwangju National University, and I will also serve as a discussant too. So without further ado, let me ask the Professor Robert Sutter to present the paper on the Trump administration policies toward the Korean Peninsula and the unification of Korea and South Korea's responses. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here with you today for this opportunity. And I thank the organizers for inviting me to come to this important panel and these important meetings here in Seoul. My presentation, you have a paper that's in the handout that you have. My presentation is shorter than that, and it's something that comes from Washington, I guess, is that you always have to be within the time limit and be very careful. So I had to pare it down a bit in my presentation. It focuses on what we know, and I emphasize that, what we know about the incoming Trump administration's policies toward the Korean Peninsula and the unification of Korea, and it offers some implications for South Korea. It has 2 parts, and they both are like situation reports. I was involved in a situation report on Korean and other attitudes toward the United States during the elections. And I benefited from that, and I'm incorporated those findings in the first part of the paper. What did the experts in South Korea think about Trump before the election? And then the second part is also based on interviews that are underway in the region, looking at U.S.-China competition and what the countries are doing as a result of that. And those interviews in South Korea are used to help me in the second part of looking at what Trump's done and how the South Koreans have reacted. So what did South Korea expect from the Trump administration prior to the election? Prior to President Trump's successful election in November and taking office in January, South Korean government officials and non-government specialists and commentators expected generally negative consequences for South Korean interests if Trump once again took office. Heading the list were disruptive tariffs focused on China in particular because of its large trade surplus with the United States, but also including South Korea and other major trading partners with a trade surplus with the United States. Another element in this situation was also expected were renewed demands from Trump's first administration regarding the idea of South Korea providing more host nation support for the U.S. forces in Korea and to increase military spending and undertake more responsibility in defense of allied interests in the Korean Peninsula and the broader region. Another element, Trump's first-term policy on North Korea changed radically, as we know, from unprecedented threats, let's not forget that, to two amicable summit meetings, which tended to put South Korea in a secondary position in dealing with North Korea. Some in South Korea saw the summits as an opportunity to progress toward an eventual peaceful unification of the Korean Peninsula. But as we know, the summits failed, and North Korea resolutely advanced its nuclear weapons capabilities. Whether Trump would once again seek a summit and possibly reach an agreement with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un remains uncertain. It is also expected that Trump would put aside the Joseph Biden's administration's efforts to sustain close consultations with allies and partners and follow agreed upon and predictable policies. Trump, it was expected by the South Koreans to be unpredictable and often unilateral in making abrupt policy changes with little warning. Because South Korea needed to preserve the solid alliance relationship with the United States in the face of an expanding North Korean threat, Seoul's options for dealing with negative consequences of Trump's re-election was seen as limited. Please keep in mind an ally's concern with keeping the alliance. This is something you're going to see all over the region. And this is something that even when they're in bad circumstances with the United States, they still want that alliance. Okay, now let's look at what happens when Trump takes power. Whatever concerns South Koreans had about their relations with incoming Donald Trump administration were superseded by South Korea's protracted leadership crisis. Following the aborted declaration of martial law by President Yoon on December 3. The prolonged transition process ended 6 months later with the election of President Lee on June 3rd. But the aftermath put issues of needed political reform and economic stimulus at the top of the new administration's policy agendas. It's important to keep this in mind. If South Korea has big differences with the Trump administration, they still remain secondary in their priority in dealing with the issues they face today. These domestic issues are more important. Okay, then we have Trump taking action and as a president. And this is something, the issue of his control is something that's been mentioned, and I just want to make a couple of concrete points about this. He has great support, he has great control over the federal bureaucracy of the federal government. He didn't have that before. Now he has it. It's very tightly controlled. Everybody's doing what Mr. Trump wants to do. They're very careful about this. He controls the Congress. I worked for Congress for 23 years. You don't control the Congress easily, but he controls the Republican majorities in the Congress. He can get them to do what he wants them to do. And so this is great power. The Supreme Court, the courts could be a check on his power. 6 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court were done by Republicans, and 3 of them were appointed by President Trump himself. So he has a lot of leverage in the U.S. government at this particular time. So what he wants is quite important. And what does he want? Well, he did all sorts of things that were very dramatic. And so waves of executive orders mandated radically reducing the size, cost, and impact of U.S. government organizations. Tens of thousands of federal government employees lost their jobs. Foreign aid and other spending abroad was frozen. The FBI, CIA, State Department, and other agencies protecting America at home and abroad were being downsized. The U.S. withdrew from the landmark Paris Climate Treaty Agreement, the World Trade Organization. President Trump prominently threatened Canada, Mexico, Denmark, Panama, and Colombia with harsh measures if they didn't meet his demands for U.S. control over the Panama Canal, over Greenland, and even over Canada. And then he did this. He supported Putin's claims. He rebuked the Ukrainian president and signaled an end to U.S. leadership in supporting opposition to Russian expansionism. Some South Korean critics warned of such a U.S. reversal involving the American commitment to defend South Korea. And they were not reassured when Trump's remarkable thaw with Russia coincided with Putin's solidifying support for North Korea, then promising to punish South Korea. Trump's tariffs, and then we get to tariffs. Trump's tariffs went well beyond what had been anticipated. Remember, they had been anticipating these tariffs, but nothing like this. South Korea was impacted by specific tariffs on autos as well as steel and aluminum and so-called reciprocal tariffs. They came on top of a fixed tariff rate, leading to the overall rate of 35%. China retaliated, leading to a tit-for-tat escalation. Many South Korean suppliers of components to Chinese products exported by China to the United States were impacted by this kind of development. Now, in response to these actions, international markets reacted badly. And this caused the U.S. administration to do what? To shift, to compromise, to move, to have a pause in the reciprocal tariffs. So we need to keep that in mind as well. You know, there's a big action and then a pullback. At home, President Lee in Korea and the leadership of the National Assembly are in the same political party and closely aligned. But the political opposition remains a force amid divided public opinion. Dealing with Trump administration challenges head the list of foreign priorities, along with the growing threat from North Korea, backed by more strongly by Russia, and with China consistently siding with them, despite some signs of disagreement. Against this background, President Lee is seen likely to follow pragmatic policies, seeking progress and endeavoring to deal effectively with negative developments at home and abroad. Trump administration tariffs are outwardly much more serious than seen during the first Trump administration, but their impact has been weakened by the reversal and pause in the reciprocal tariffs, and U.S. seeking compromises with China to avoid a trade war. Against this background, the Lee administration pledges to negotiate with South Korean interests firmly in mind. South Korean experts note that South Korea may get better treatment on tariffs by offering greater South Korean investment in manufacturing in the United States, cooperation in U.S. efforts on high technology export controls targeting China, assisting U.S. shipbuilding efforts, and other initiatives less costly to South Korea than the high tariffs. Regarding security issues, the worry that the United States might withdraw troops from South Korea and pull back from alliance commitments was offset by the strong military commitment to the Indo-Pacific region focused on deterring Chinese aggression, voiced by Secretary of Defense Hegseth on May 31. And this has subsequently been reinforced by the National Security Advisor and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Reported U.S. consideration of withdrawing 4,000 combat troops from South Korea to deal with a Taiwan contingency and the absence of clear Trump administration's positions on policy toward North Korea continue to raise concerns, with some in South Korea worrying the United States will seek to reach an agreement with North Korea, thereby freeing U.S. troops in South Korea to be repositioned or reoriented to deal with China. Widely discussed reported U.S. demands on increased South Korean defense spending and host nation support for U.S. troops in South Korea are there, but they need clarification. You don't know exactly what they're asking. There remains a long-standing and growing South Korean concern that U.S. commitment to protect South Korea from North Korean aggression will be reduced as North Korea develops a capacity to strike the continental United States with nuclear weapons. The concern is reinforced with President Trump's remarks seeking to accept North Korea as a nuclear power. Under these circumstances, South Korea is forecast to give greater consideration to nuclear options within the scope of the alliance and perhaps outside the scope of the alliance. In sum, South Korea, like most other U.S. allies and partners, is determined to preserve the alliance relationship with the United States. Despite the many difficulties and challenges posed by Trump administration policies and actions, they are prepared to put aside the Trump administration's reversal of the Biden government's emphasis on close allied consultation and cooperation. They are pragmatic in seeking solutions on economic and security issues. Looking out, some South Korean experts advise that since the U.S. seeks to rebuild its strength, South Korea could be important by cooperating with the United States on high technology industries, on warship repair and building, on improving the capacities of the South Korean armed forces in line with U.S. strategy and other measures. But other South Korean experts judge that the U.S. government actions in 2025 show gross incompetence in planning and executing important policies, which has weakened the power, influence, and value of the United States to South Korea. Regarding China, President Lee is expected to seek improved ties with Beijing, but a major breakthrough is seen as unlikely. This is important to keep in mind. It's often considered that a U.S. loss is a Chinese net gain. It really isn't in most cases because of China's actions. But Beijing, the public opinion remains negative, and opposition may, in South Korea about China, and opposition may again seek advantage by portraying the government as pro-China. South Korea is alienated by China, continues support for Russia in Ukraine, featuring ever closer North Korean involvement, and development of adding to the North Korean threat to South Korea. Economically, China remains important for various South Korean businesses, but China also is ever more serious a rival, threatening South Korea's advantages in modern manufacturing. South Korea does not see China providing a market for South Korean manufactured goods now excluded by tariffs from the U.S. market. Rather, China is sending to South Korea and other world markets sophisticated manufacturers previously sent to the United States market, now blocked by tariffs. China as a consumer is hard to see. It can't displace the United States that way at all. On Japan, Lee is forecast for now to continue the recent improvement in cooperation. And like other U.S. Indo-Pacific allies and partners, the Seoul government is seeking a wider array of economic and security agreements bilaterally and multilaterally with Indo-Pacific governments and others, such as NATO, in order to support its interests at a time of uncertainty in relations with the United States. So some conclusions. Based on what we know up to this point, they include this. Trump administration's use of tariffs is clear and worse than expected. Its impact remains uncertain, given the U.S. retreat in the face of international markets reacting negatively to the initial barrage of tariff announcements and China's firm reaction. Second, Trump's security policy remains to be officially released, but seems to be focused on a more robust military effort to deter Chinese expansionism in Asia. This counters the concern that Trump seeks to make a deal with China at the expense of Asian allies and partners, comparable to his recent turnabout, siding more with Putin and withdrawing support from Ukraine and European allies. And what we see is a doubling down of the military commitment to deter China in the Indo-Pacific. Widely reported U.S. demands on increased South Korean defense spending and host nation support for U.S. troops need clarification. It's hard to gauge how important they are at this point. As expected, Trump's treatment of South Korea and other allies and partners is much less consultative and cooperative than Biden's administration. Trump's policies on North Korea and issues involved with Korean unification remain to be determined, very vague. And unlike other regional governments giving top priority to dealing with Trump administration initiatives, South Korea gives top priority to domestic issues of political reform and economic revival following 6 months of dramatic presidential leadership crisis. Do I have 2 more minutes? Okay, I thought I might have a little extra time. And let me just, I've done about 55 interviews in the Indo-Pacific region thus far about about gauging U.S.-China, their country's position in the U.S.-China competition and rivalry. And it's hard to come with general findings, but it clarifies what Trump's administration is doing and why they're doing it. Because Trump himself is very episodic and very scattered and unpredictable and moves from one thing to the next. But there is a big change in American policy that was pointed out to me by observers in Japan and in Australia. And this I wanted to share with you. Based on these interviews, you see a major change in U.S. strategy toward the Indo-Pacific region, justifying it. For over 5 decades now, the U.S. government has justified close and cooperative engagement in the Indo-Pacific for an important rationale: the need for close beneficial engagement with Asia's vibrant economies. That's been in the documents throughout this period. And so, well, yes, Asia is a vibrant democracy, but Mr. Trump and his people see this, this element in the past was a significant, important element, adding to the long-standing U.S. security rationale of preserving a favorable balance of power in East Asia. That latter has been there, and it still is. But this one has changed. Donald Trump's administration no longer sees economic engagement as a positive with these East Asian countries. It is seen as a net negative. The United States is in the process of making it more positive. So the U.S. government is trying to do things that will make it a more positive relationship, not to withdraw, but to do it. But the question is, will they get what they need? Will they get what they want? I think that's a big question. And so this is if that doesn't work, an important reason for U.S. strong involvement in the region will be removed. So keep that in mind. It helps me to understand it. If you lose that, then you don't have the same bond that you had before. And the reason to stay closely engaged is reduced. However, the long-standing U.S. security rationale remains. The competition with China is very hot. And the military emphasis of the Trump administration underlines that point. And so this will remain. And remember, this was the main rationale for U.S. involvement in dealing with East Asia in the 1950s and in the 1960s and up through the 70s. Well, certainly through the 50s and 60s. In other words, it was security. It wasn't the vibrant economies of Asia, hardly. That came later. And we had a close relationship with various countries at that juncture. So anyway, I thought the development was important. It certainly it struck me as something that it's a way of thinking about it, which I think might help us as we proceed. So I'll stop there and wait for questions.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Professor Sutter. Indeed, the re-election of President Trump, changed a lot of things, not only the international relations, but also the foreign policy and also the domestic politics. So I'm wondering whether, if the American people elect maybe Democratic or the liberal president in the next presidential election 2028, and then I'm wondering whether there is a room for the United States to change somewhat its the domestic policies and also its foreign policy. You can respond to my question later.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Repeat it again next time.
Okay, I see. Let's turn to the second presentation, and Professor Nishino Junya from the Keio University on the Japan's foreign and security policy toward the Korean Peninsula. Okay, please.
Thank you, Professor Fan. First of all, I want to express my gratitude to Korean Political Science Association and the UniKorea Foundation for organizing this session and inviting me as a panelist. Today, I will present my paper on Japan's foreign and security policy toward the Korean Peninsula, focusing on Japan's North Korea policy framework, the evolution of trilateral cooperation, and the future policy challenges. The Korean Peninsula occupies a central position in Japan's security calculations. While my full paper examines the historic foundation of Japan's Korea policy, given our time constraint, I will concentrate on 3 critical dimensions. Number 1, Japan's 3-pillar approach to North Korea. Number 2, the development of Japan-US ROK trilateral cooperation. And number 3, emerging policy challenges and the new political leaderships. So let me begin with Japan's North Korea policy. which has been structured around three fundamental pillars since the 1990s. This framework has shown consistency despite changing administrations and evolving regional dynamics. The first pillar is engagement. Japan has consistently pursued normalization with North Korea, viewing this as essential for regional stability. The most significant achievement was Prime Minister Koizumi's historic visit to Pyongyang in September 2002. The resulting Pyongyang Declaration appeared to be a breakthrough, with North Korea admitting to abducting Japanese citizens and agreeing to a comprehensive framework for normalization. However, the summit aftermath revealed deep challenges. Disputes over unsolved abductees and North Korea's nuclear programs undermined the normalization process. Japan attempted another breakthrough in 2014 with the Stockholm Agreement, where North Korea agreed to investigate all Japanese nationals in exchange for partial sanction relief. This too failed to produce concrete results. Parallel to engagement, Japan has employed comprehensive pressure tactics. The abduction issue became paramount in Japan's policy after 2002, with family association, media coverage, and the Blue Ribbon campaigns creating sustained domestic pressure for resolution. Japan's sanction regime has evolved into one of the most comprehensive globally, including trade restriction that eliminated bilateral commerce, financial sanction targeting North Korean entities, travel bans and port entry restriction, and asset freeze linked to weapons programs. Japan has also been a leading advocate for international pressure through the United Nations Security Council, actively supporting successive rounds of sanctions. Third pillar involves enhancing defense capabilities. North Korea's advancing nuclear and missile programs have driven significant changes in Japan's defense posture. This includes strengthening the US-Japan alliance specifically for North Korean contingencies, developing indigenous capabilities like ballistic missile defense system, and pursuing trilateral security cooperation. Trilateral security cooperation has evolved gradually but steadily since the late 1990s. The initial catalyst was the North Korean nuclear crisis of 1993 to 1994, which demonstrated the need for coordinated responses. The Trilateral Coordination and Oversight Group, or TCOC, established in 1999, marked the first institutionalization of three-way coordination. While its effectiveness varied with political climate, TCOC established important precedents for cooperation. But military cooperation faced significant obstacles given historical sensitivities between Japan and South Korea. The progress required careful diplomatic management. A significant milestone came in December 2014 with the Trilateral Information Sharing Agreement, or TISA, regarding North Korean threat. This established a mechanism for sharing intelligence through the United States as an intermediary, avoiding direct Japan-ROK military intelligence cooperation, while enabling practical coordination. The acceleration of North Korea's program in the mid-2010s created new urgency. We saw increased frequency of trilateral exercises, enhanced missile defense cooperation, and regular defense ministerial meetings. The August 2023 Camp David Summit represents a watershed moment in dealing with North Korean military threats. The outcome went beyond previous agreement in crucial ways. First, real-time missile warning data sharing. Building on the November 22 Phnom Penh joint statement commitment, the three nations operationalized a system that became operational the end of 2023 significantly enhance collective defense capabilities. Second, regularize joint exercises. The commitment to annual named multi-domain exercise marked a shift from ad hoc to institutionalized coordination. The Freedom Edge exercises in 2024 demonstrated this approach, incorporating naval, air, and cyber components. Third, cyber cooperation. Recognizing North Korea's growing cyber capabilities, a working group was established that has met regularly since 2023, addressing both traditional threats and North Korea's cyber operation for revenue generation. So now let me turn to the critical challenges facing this framework going forward. The return of Trump administration this year introducing significant uncertainties. Based on his first term, we anticipated several challenges. First, potential US-DPRK dialogue. Trump's expressed interest in resuming dialogue with Kim Jong-un could complicate trilateral coordination. Previous Trump-Kim summit demonstrated how bilateral engagement could sideline allied concern. Japan's abduction issue and South Korea's inter-Korean agenda may not align with Trump's focus on interacting with Kim or limited arms control. Second, alliance management challenges. Trump's transactional approach and the burden sharing demands could strain both alliances, indirectly affecting trilateral cooperation if allies compete for US attention and resources. Third, exercise modifications. If US-DPRK dialogue resumes, there may be pressure to modify joint exercises, as occurred previously, directly impacting the regularized trilateral exercises established after the Camp David Agreement. The change in South Korean leadership also introduced a new dynamics. While the new Lee Jae-myung administration has indicated support for maintaining trilateral coordination, we must carefully watch for, number one, potential shift toward a greater engagement with North Korea. Number two, domestic pressure regarding Japan relations. And number three, challenges of balancing US alliance commitment with inter-Korean initiatives. Given these dynamics, I will propose several recommendations for Japanese policy. First, strengthen policy coordination mechanisms. With new administration in Washington and Seoul, Japan should prioritize reinvigorating trilateral coordination framework. Second, expanding the trilateral cooperation to a new horizon across domains and across the Indo-Pacific and beyond, which is one of the greatest significance of the Camp David Agreement. It would be desirable for Japan and South Korea to cooperate in advancing steady support for global South countries in the Indo-Pacific region, even without US participation. Third, strengthen bilateral Japan-ROK ties. Given their relative fragility compared Japan-US and ROK-US alliance, Tokyo should prioritize relationship with Seoul. Prime Minister Ishiba's positive attitude towards South Korea and the 60th anniversary of our normalization in 2025, this year, present opportunities. Recent surveys provide ground for sustainable Japan-ROK ties. The June 2025 Yomiuri Shimbun and Hanguk Ilbo joint survey showed over 80% support in both countries for strengthening trilateral security cooperation. And 71 of Japanese and 63 of South Koreans support enhanced bilateral defense cooperation. However, sustaining public support requires, number one, clear communication about cooperation benefits. Number two, sensitivities to security, historical concern, while emphasizing shared interest and tangible benefit citizens can recognize. And number 3, managing nationalist pressure in both countries. In conclusion, Japan's Korea Peninsula policy reflects complex interactions of history, geography, and evolving security dynamics. Three-pillar approach to North Korea has shown both resilience and adaptability. Trilateral coordination, cooperation, culminating at Camp David, represent a significant achievement in overcoming security obstacles. However, this framework faces a new test with administration changes and evolving regional dynamics. Success requires balancing multiple imperatives. Number 1, maintaining alliance cohesion while pursuing national interest. Number 2, addressing historical legacies while building future-oriented partnership. And number 3, managing immediate threat while working toward a long-term stability. The 60th anniversary of Japan ROK normalization in this year offered an opportunity for renewal. By building on recent progress and adopting new challenges, Japan can and should contribute to a more stable Korean peninsula, serving all regional stakeholders' interests. As East Asia navigates strategic competition and power transition, Japan's principled yet flexible approach, contributing to both deterrence and dialogue, can help create conditions for eventual peaceful resolution while ensuring interim security and stability. I stop here. Thank you for attention.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Professor Nishino Junya Sang. Especially you emphasized the importance of the trilateral security cooperation between U.S., Japan, and South Korea. Starting from the 1990s, starting from the TCOC and until the Camp David. But the thing is that the leaders from the Camp David, the President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, and President Yoon, they are all gone. Nobody remains now. So I think there is a very serious challenge for the trilateral the security cooperation between three countries. So when you respond to your question, I hope that you explained how the three countries can improve the current trilateral security cooperation despite those kind of challenges, especially challenges led by the President Trump and also the three countries, the domestic politics. Okay, let's turn to the third the presentation. The presenter is Professor Ma Sang-yoon, Professor of Catholic University of Korea on retrospection and prospect on 8 years of division. Please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sang-yoon Ma. I'm a professor at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you for inviting me to this very wonderful panel. I feel very much prestiged. It seems I present papers on unification or inter-Korean relations roughly once every decade. I was invited to the 60th anniversary of liberation and 70th, and this time 8 years. But I vividly still remember how challenging it was each time because no matter how hard I tried and pondered, I couldn't find a clear answer as to how unification could be achieved. Well, in this paper, I try to look back of our approaches in the past and at the same time try to ponder some of the principles that we have to maintain in order to achieve unification in the future. I try to reflect firstly on the persistent challenges of Korean unification. This is a topic, as I just mentioned, that I've revisited for major anniversaries. In my 2005 paper, I tried to look back and I described efforts to improve inter-Korean relations as the regrettable efforts of Sisyphus. I wanted to note that despite 2 decades of passing since 2005, the situation here in the Korean Peninsula has only worsened. Geopolitical competition has intensified, and North Korea has effectively become a nuclear state. Declaring a hostile two-state theory and abandoning unification as a goal. Concurrently, South Korean society, particularly its younger generation, shows waning enthusiasm for unification, with a growing preference for peaceful coexistence. This sets the stage for the paper's central question: why this has happened, and should unification still be pursued, and if so, how? Now, let me turn to history of Korean division and try to draw some lessons from it. Korea's division began in 1945 after the liberation from Imperial Japan, with the United States and Soviet Union establishing military rule along the 38th parallel. Despite initial intention for temporary trusteeship, the Soviet Union quickly moved to communize North Korea. It should be noted, as soon as the Red Army reached North Korea, it formally closed the 38th parallel and severed communication and exchanges with the South. It was even before the arrival of American forces to South Korea. In the South, political factions clashed, with Seungman Rhee advocating for a separate anti-communist government and Kim Gu pushing for a unified Korea. The burgeoning Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union favored Seungman Rhee's stance. Attempts to establish a unified Korean government through the US-Soviet Joint Commission failed, leading the issue of establishing a unified Korean government to the United Nations. North Korea's refusal of UN-supervised election resulted in the establishment of the Republic of Korea, the South Korea, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north shortly after, formalizing the division. The aspiration for unification persisted, however, even through using military forces. Kim Il-sung's invasion of South Korea in June 1950, supported by the Soviet Union and Communist China, led to the Korean War. While a truce was achieved in July 1953, the brutal conflict merely replaced the 38th parallel with the military demarcation line, deepening the division and hostility between the North and South. After the armistice, Seungman Rhee's desire for marching north unification was rejected by the United States, which prioritized South Korea's defense and economic development. The policy of construction first, unification afterwards emerged after Seungman Rhee's overthrow in 1960, shifting the focus to system competition between the two Koreas. Competition regarding economic performance, political systems, and national legitimacy, with the underlying belief that proving system superiority would lead to unification. This competition was fierce until the 1980s, when South Korea's economic growth began to shift the balance. The process of Korean division, as described above, yield, I think, two key implications. First, it should be emphasized that both international and domestic factors contributed to the division and its deepening, suggesting that unification efforts must similarly address both dimensions in parallel. Second, The long-standing Cold War competition effectively postponed unification, and the premises that system victory would immediately lead to unification proved incorrect. Unification isn't automatically achieved by proving the superiority of a system. It requires special efforts and the measures of good luck, maybe. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, German reunification in 1990, and the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991 signaled the end of the Cold War and its ideological confrontation. This era seemingly brought an end to the system competition on the Korean Peninsula as well. North Korea became diplomatically isolated, and the economic gap with the South Korea widened significantly, more than 10 times by 1991. South Korea's democratization after 1983 further mitigated Seoul's political vulnerabilities. With South Korea's effective victory in the system competition, expectation for unification under its leadership grew. The Notae government's Nordpolitik led to the Inter-Korean Basic Agreement and simultaneous UN entry for both Koreas. These achievements, along with Germany's reunification, raised expectations for Korean unification. In particular, there was an expectation for an imminent collapse of North Korean regime. However, this expectation did not materialize. Instead, North Korea embarked on a serious nuclear weapons development in response to its post-Cold War crisis. The first nuclear crisis erupted in 1993, and despite agreed framework between the United States and North Korea, the second crisis emerged in 2002. Since then, denuclearization has dominated the Korean Peninsula agenda, with unification largely fading from the international discourse. North Korea's nuclear ambitions, rooted in its necessity of self-defense and survival after losing international support, culminated in 6 nuclear tests by 2016. South Korea's attempts to address this problem through both appeasement and hardline policies failed to achieve denuclearization or accelerated peaceful reunification. North Korea's tactics and strategies for evading international economic sanctions, coupled with China's minimal support and internal domestic regime control, allowed North Korea to withstand outside pressures. Appeasement policies aimed at alleviating North Korea's security concerns, ironically, were also viewed by Pyongyang as dangerous, as they could lead to information inflow and internal unrest. Based on the above observation, we can conclude that both collapse theory and hope for reform and probably a Chinese-style development model applied in North Korea were both wishful thinking. The North Korean regime has established a survival formula based on isolation, internal surveillance and control, and nuclear deterrence. South Korean policy have failed to neutralize this formula so far, and unfortunately, there seems to be little prospect of that happening in the near future. The Moon Jae-in government's Korean Peninsula peace process, marked by the Inter-Korean and DPRK US summits in 2018 and 2019, initially raised high hopes, but ultimately failed after the Hanoi summit in 2019. This failure underscored the limitations of appeasement policies. Current North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, despite its initial appearance of sincerity in negotiations, ultimately prioritized regime safety and demonstrated no intention of relinquishing nuclear weapons. In the meantime, after the failure of the Hanoi summit, international environment has further complicated the situation, with accelerating strategic competition between the United States and China and the ongoing war in Ukraine. This so-called new Cold War era of geopolitical chaos benefits North Korea, expanding its diplomatic maneuvering space. China, while advocating North Korea's denuclearization in principle, prioritized maintaining North Korean regime as a buffer zone against the United States. North Korea has effectively leveraged China's strategic interest, as seen in Chinese President Xi Jinping's increasing engagement with Kim Jong-un around the year 2018 and 2019. Currently, North Korea is strengthening its ties with Russians, providing artillery and troops support for the war in Ukraine in exchange for economic assistance and potentially sensitive military technologies, such as the technologies for ICBM re-entry vehicle, strategic nuclear submarine reactors, reconnaissance satellite. Russia's recent veto on the extension of the UN panel of experts on DPRK sanctions further weakens monitoring of North Korean violation. North Korea aims to develop nuclear attack capabilities against the United States, seeking international recognition as a nuclear state through arms control talks and ultimately normalization of DPRK-US relations. This could lead to a peace treaty replacing current armistice and raise questions about the continued presence of US forces in Korea and the continuation of ROK-US alliance, particularly given President Donald Trump's negative views on the alliance cost to the United States. While the future Trump administration's approach to North Korea is not yet publicized, Trump himself seems to have a strong interest in resuming dialogue with Kim Jong-un. However, the prospect of US DPRK dialogue is not bright, in my view, and any decisions made without considering South Korea's security concerns, such as acknowledging North Korea's nuclear status or withdrawing USFK, would be problematic for South Korea. Given these complex security concerns, South Korea finds it difficult to prioritize unification. Instead, security and peace are likely to be taken urgent policy priority. Within South Korean society, skepticism towards unification has grown due to the lack of progress on denuclearization and increasing animosity toward North Korea. The younger generation in particular is increasingly open to the idea of peaceful coexistence, simply living separately without conflict. This notion of peaceful coexistence strangely aligns with North Korea's recent declaration of the two hostile state theory, both moving away from the long-held goal of overcoming division. Because achieving a unification has become even more difficult, in the short term, prioritizing peace and stability over unification is, I think, a little bit unavoidable. The primary task then should be to transform North Korea's hostile two-state doctrine into a peaceful two-state relationship. However, I'd like to caution that even
it is very difficult to achieve the objective of the peaceful coexistence. And that, even if it is achieved, stability of such coexistence is questionable due to the shared ethnic identity and the inherent awareness of each other as subjects of comparison. While peaceful coexistence can be an interim step, it cannot be the ultimate goal. Peaceful and stable peace can only be achieved through unification that overcomes division. South Korea must exert maximum efforts to stabilize its relations with North Korea in the short term, recognizing that peaceful coexistence, while a desirable short-term goal, but at the same time we will have to remember that it should be a provisional and can be unstable. Also, South Korea should not hastily rush out of desperation into a hasty deal. Instead, it better consistently do what's possible under a long-term vision. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mar. It's really interesting and sad to hear that Professor Mar delivers paper on Korean division and unification once every 10 years. And then I'm really wondering what kind of paper he will deliver in 2035, in 10 years. But before that, we need to make effort to resolve the Korean division and also try to achieve the unification. Okay, we have two designated discussants for the three papers, and then Professor Im Eun-jung from Gwangju University, Gwangju National University, will focus on Professor Robert Sutter's and also Professor Nishino Junya's paper, and I will discuss mostly Professor Mar's the paper. Okay, let's turn to the Professor Im.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's again my great honor to join this wonderful panel. And again, the congratulations for UniKorea Foundation, which celebrates 10th anniversary. Again, the thank you for helping us organize this panel. And I truly enjoyed reading the three wonderful papers. Again, the Professor Sutter and Professor Nishino and Professor Ma's paper. Each paper offers a very critical lens, I think, on where we stand now and where we may be headed. So before I make some comments and questions to the two papers, again, the Professor Sutter's and Professor Nishino's paper, let me just briefly share how I see the broader dilemma that the Korean Peninsula faces now. So, we have now President Lee Jae-myung. I think he's very close. But anyhow, he declares or he pledges so-called pragmatic diplomacy. Who's going to reject that? Who's going to be against that idea? I think overall, any Korean citizen, any Korean national, South Korean here, again, we are pragmatic people. We truly enjoy the pragmatism we have had because we know we have been surviving and we have been becoming prosperous thanks to that kind of pragmatic approach. The thing is now the circumstances, again, the international circumstances really is not that much compatible with that so-called conventional wisdom. Again, we are navigating a moment of deep, I think, structure contradiction. Again, the conventional wisdom, what we here in South Korea, we call 경미 안중, again, the economic engagement with China and the security cooperation, with the United States, it's already, again, the lost its traction. The assumption that South Korea could enjoy the best of the both worlds has already collapsed under the intensifying, again, the strategic rivalry between the United States, again, our ally, and China, again, which is the closest neighbor to us, and at the same time, which has, I think, still the strongest, powerful leverage vis-a-vis the North, and at the same time, it is still very much attractive market for Korean, again, the company. And meanwhile, the hub and spoke system, another conventional wisdom, hub and spoke system center, again, namely, again, the United States, is no longer, I think, perceived as a very reliable anchor of the system. So transactional approaches to alliance management, especially under President Trump, have raised serious concerns about the durability of the extended deterrence and the shared strategic commitments. So let me briefly introduce another latest public survey. I appreciate Professor Nishino earlier mentioned about the another public survey data, but EAI, I think many of you are familiar with the institution, East Asian Institution, and they have conducted another very important public poll. And according to the public poll data, again, many of us, more than, of course, 76% of Korean people perceive, again, inter-Korean relations as bad. The thing is, it actually improved compared to before, compared to last year. I think that reflects some kind of hopeful minds or optimism about the new administration. The thing is, we have a very mixed feeling. At the same time, even though we feel like the inter-Korean relationship is that much bad, but still, 30% of us said, it can be improved within 10 years. And at the same time, they said, extended deterrence, especially nuclear umbrella provided by the United States, it's not that much enough. Again, the 40%, more than 41% actually, if the respondents say it's enough, but the other 52% said that's not enough. And as long as, again, North Korea does not give up, again, their nuclear weapon program, if so, we should also pursue our own endogenous, again, the nuclear weapon, again, the 75%, which is oh my God, which is a big number. So what I'm trying to say is, I don't want to blame anybody else. I think we should blame us first. Again, we Koreans are still very much mixed, ambiguous. We don't know what we are trying to do, and we don't know what we are, again, heading to. But realistically speaking, of course, we want peace. As Professor Ma pointed out, we definitely need a stability, peace, and no exchange of violence. But at the same time, we are very much skeptical about the unification, and we are skeptical about the extended deterrence as well. So that is why we want to have a nuclear weapon. So as all this mixed, I think, data, again, that really is embarrassing, to be very honest with you. So having said that, on the other side, North, again, they has strategically embraced, I think, asymmetry. Again, I love watching martial arts. I don't play that, but I love to see that, watch that. But again, in martial arts, the important thing is how to change your position. They already changed their position. Of course, they are economically speaking much weaker, much weaker than us. By conventional military force, of course, they are much weaker than us. But who cares? Again, North, they already got the nuclear, they already got the cyber capability, or they got Russia. So this is really, they already changed their game. So we have been more like just responsive to what they are doing without having our own vision. And I think today's this situation is the result of our, again, the lack of strategic views or the vision. So having said that, let me just go to the Professor Sauter's paper. Again, I truly appreciate your paper, your view, and you said if United States under the Mr. Trump not only just retreats from the regional leadership, but actively disrupts it through transactional or unilateral behavior. If so, how would you like to suggest for South Korea and Japan respond? Again, as Professor Nishino already pointed out, the demand for the security cooperation between the South Korea and Japan is now pretty high. This is an unprecedented. This is, I think, all this kind of strong demand from both societies is unprecedented. But without, again, the strong, very consistent, coherent leadership of Washington, do you think, again, can still the two neighbors begin to coordinate strategic responses, even independently of Washington? And if so, what would be the limits of such self-reliant minilateralism? That is my question to the Professor Sata. And Professor Nishino, again, I always enjoy your presentation today, absolutely. But your paper reminds us, I think, despite broader regional power shifts, again, the stability of the Korean Peninsula remains still as a strategic cornerstone for Japan. I strongly agree with that view. So for Japan, the Korean Peninsula cannot be just a peripheral issue. Rather, of course, it is an arena where risk can escalate rapidly and unpredictably, of course, which is not a desirable scenario for Japan anyhow. So my question to you is, while you emphasize, again, the institutional resilience and Japan's desire for predictability, how do you think, again, the Japan's North Korea policy evolve in light of South Korea's increasingly autonomous and even peace-oriented approach, especially with the new president, again, the President Lee Jae-myung? And if Seoul places more emphasis on crisis stability and peaceful coexistence, as Professor Ma suggested, what room do you think is there for the policy coordination between the Seoul and Tokyo? So, in conclusion, again, I really enjoyed these reading again the three different paper. But I think as one of the IR scholar, our task is not just only to analyze and interpret what's going on there. Hopefully, we can imagine together how the regional actors like South Korea and Japan and anybody else can act with creativity and resilience, even in the absence of a very strong and consistent leadership. I'm sorry to say this again from Washington. So let's imagine again, let's discuss together about the future. Thank you again, thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks a lot for your discussion, Professor Im. And then after my discussion on Professor Ma's paper, I'll try to open to the floor. So please prepare for your questions in advance. Let me discuss Professor Ma Sang-yoon's paper. And I think that his presentation is offering a very sobering but and also the very insightful reflection on the enduring the complexities of the inter-Korean relations and the Korean the divisions. He says that 20 years later, not much has changed, unquote. So this echoes his previous papers that the South Korea's diplomatic effort resembles the regrettable effort of Sisyphus, the perpetual and exhausting, but seemingly futile. But seems to me that while the fundamental problem of the Korean division remains the same, but the landscape in this year, 2025, is not identical to that of 2005 and 2015. So, several key, changes, demands to our the attention. So, North Korea has now firmly entrenched its nuclear status, nuclear power. The President Trump already called North Korea nuclear power, and also North Korea has officially renounced the unification policy, calling the inter-Korean relations as two hostile the nations in war. So North Korea is now promoting a hostile two-state doctrine. So South Korea, for its part, has seen public enthusiasm for unification erode significantly, especially among younger generations. There are generation gap on unification between older generation and younger generation in Korea. So the younger generations, increasingly favor the idea of the peaceful coexistence of a vague and uncertain goal of unification that Professor Ma explained today. So these internal changes are paralleled by a broad shift in international dynamics. I think the emergence of what we call the new Cold War, 신냉전, is different from, although of course it's different from the old one in the 20th century, the U.S.-Soviet, Cold War split. But still, we are now, facing the U.S.-China strategic competition and also the U.S.-Russia, tension. So, which is a period of intensified, international relations, including the war in Ukraine and the growing, alignment of North Korea with the Russia. This kind of, changes raises the question of whether the Cold War paradigm, although it's not same, but is still being revived in the 21st century. So North Korea also, Kim Jong-un himself, said that, mentioned about the term new Cold War, 신냉전 in North Korean terms, with, strategic, his strategic intent, seeing this global realignment as a chance for North Korea to be maneuvering diplomatically and deepen ties with Beijing and Moscow. So I think that is why North Korea is now focusing on improving relations with Russia and concluding the defense treaty and also trying to recover its relations with Beijing. But unlike the rigid bipolarity of the 20th century, today's geopolitical environment is less ideological and more opportunistic. But also, Kim Jong-un says the 신냉전, new Cold War, and the multipolarity. So it's not he perceives it's not a bipolar system, but multipolar system. So which is not an American-led unipolarity. Professor Ma's key insight is that Korean Peninsula division has always been shaped by a combination of internal and domestic forces, which I totally agree to. So accordingly, any pathway toward unification or even peaceful coexistence must address both dimensions, the domestic and international. So he criticized the past South Korean policies, both the conciliatory or the hardline, the conservative and progressive policies, as ultimately ineffective in neutralizing North Korea's survival, logic. So has been very ineffective. Didn't achieve, anything, any meaningful, consequence like a Sisyphus work. So North Korea is now, is a inward-looking regime, deeply committed to nuclear deterrence and political control. So the failure of the 2019 Hanoi Summit meeting was, I think, the turning point for Kim Jong-un, confirming that even North Korea's younger leadership prioritizes the regime stability above all, rather than the engagement policy with the United States. So in this context, Professor Ma does not reject the notion of peaceful coexistence, but warns against treating it as the final destination, because Kim Jong-un rejected the inter-Korean relations and the unification of the Korean peninsula. So we also need to think about the peaceful coexistence. So he argues that while the peaceful two-state coexistence, two-state relationship on the Korean peninsula may serve as a necessary interim step, but it cannot replace the long-term goal of unification. So this stance raises a very difficult but urgent, challenges: how to pursue peace without surrendering the vision of overcoming division. So there could be some kind of tension between the peace and the unification. How to achieve, peace without unification. How to achieve unification without peace. So there is maybe the core element of the debate in Korean domestic politics, that which one is first in dealing with North Korea, seek the peace first or the unification first. So there is in another way, there is the debate between the conservative and the progressive. So my questions for Professor Ma can be summarized as this. So compared to 2005, 2015, what is the fundamentally difference about the Korean Peninsula issue in as of 2025, and how could you also predict the Korean Peninsula situation in 2035, in 10 years, when you present your next paper in 10 years? And also, with regard to the new Cold War, the appropriate to describe the current international order, is it correct perception or not? Somebody agrees to that terms, but others, also refuse to use that term. So, but as I mentioned, the North Korea leader Kim Jong-un uses that the terminology. So, and also, if so, what implication does this have for the Korean Peninsula, the dynamics? So, how does Kim Jong-un's usage of new Cold War, Shin-Rengjun, reflect his perception of the future of Korean Peninsula? So, and the third question is about the tension between peace and unification. Peace first versus the unification first, which should take the precedence in today's the context. So I also want to reiterate my previous question to Professor Soto and Professor Nishino Junya. And then, so as I mentioned that President Trump, changed a lot, both in international relations and the domestic politics, not just the U.S. domestic politics, but also the other countries, Japanese domestic politics and Korean domestic politics. But there are also the international, context that changed the liberal international order. So if the American people elect the liberal democratic president next time in 2028, can the international relations and the U.S. foreign policy can come back to the liberal, principle and also the previous the position or not? To Professor Nishino Junya, and its question is about the trilateral, the security cooperation. So normally, both Korea and Japan prefer the bilateral to the trilateral, but the U.S. government prefer the trilateral in Northeast Asia. So that's why the Camp David, the trilateral meeting was so successful. But as I mentioned, that no leaders at the Camp David remains now. The Biden, Kishida-san, and President Yoon, they are all gone. So is there any momentum for three countries to continue this trilateral security cooperation, especially from each country's domestic politics? That's my question. Thank you. So let's turn to the three presenters and just try to answer the question about 5 minutes. each. Okay. Yeah. Professor Sutter first.
Okay, and this has been a very rich discussion. Lots of elements are raised here. Just make sure I understand from Professor Lim. Your question is similar to the just we heard from Professor Huang, and it's very similar. What do we see as the U.S. position on nurturing this trilateral relationship? Do I understand that correctly? Great. To explain that, I guess I would divide it. I would look at security issues first. Now, of course, and this is the dilemma of trying to figure out, one of the problems of trying to figure out what's going to happen in the United States. But the underlying factor here is a fundamental sense of urgency about China's danger to the United States. That's very important, and I've gotten that from talking to people in Congress and watching them over the years. And it's really a sense of, these are existential dangers. If China dominates Asia, this is going to be a fundamental threat to the United States. Just like, and Imperial Japan showed that, right, and why, and how it works. And that thinking is very, very strong. And it's married with a concern that China is going to dominate the high technology industries of the future with its economic endeavors, which are very bad from the American point of view, how they are carried out. But the fact of the matter is, if you dominate those industries, then the U.S., which has been dominant there, will lose. But more importantly, the militaries of the future depend on high technology. If you have the high technology, you're going to be the dominant military. So what is America afraid of? What are the people afraid of? They're afraid of being dominated by China. Now that fear doesn't come across in most countries that the United States deals with. It's mixed, but that urgency is very much present in the United States. And so when you see the Secretary of Defense saying what he says, you see Marco Rubio saying what he says, they reflect that. And somebody else reflects it. His name is Vance, and he's the vice president. And he too is Make America Great Again. He's too America first. And he too says, withdraw from Ukraine so we can focus on China. And so if you have that mindset, then you're going to have I think you could be arguably very crude, but an effort to say, yeah, we need this cooperation between Japan, Korea, and the United States very much if we're going to be able to defend ourselves in this part of the world and prevent China from taking over Taiwan. And so you see reports that they're asking for explicit commitments on the Japanese and the South Korean and the Australian part on dealing with the Taiwan issue. So I think that this dimension is going to continue. The momentum is there, it's very strong, and that's not going to change. But then there's Donald Trump. Nothing he says that China's a threat. Nothing. He's never said it. Why? Because he doesn't think they are a threat. Well, if he doesn't think they're a threat, and the whole momentum is moving in this direction, what's going to happen? And so I don't know. The short answer is, for your question, I don't know. But my sense is, I see him going along with this thing. Trump is going along with it. He tolerates all sorts of things. And so that momentum, it strikes me as quite strong. And I watch, we still don't have a national security strategy from this administration. The first one took a year for them to write. But my sense is, looking at what the Defense Department is saying, their opinion on this is very strong, and Rubio is backing them up. And he's the National Security Advisor as well as the Secretary of State. So this is important. And so I say, yes, they're going to do it, but maybe they're not going to do it in a very adroit way that'll be sensitive to the sensibilities of Korea and Japan. It could be quite crude. Get in line. You get in line so we can cooperate and have enough troops to deal what we have to deal with if China attacks Taiwan. So that's my basic point, I guess I would make. That sense of momentum, that sense of urgency on the part of the United States. In my interviews, I find, and interaction, I find most countries don't have that. Most don't. Most allies and partners. They have it to some degree, but nothing like Taiwan has it. Okay, Taiwan has it, but the others don't. And Japan has it to some degree, Australia has it to some degree, and so forth. So that's my observation on this issue. Thank you.
Okay, next, Professor Nishino Jr., please.
Thank you for questions. Regarding the first question, Professor Huang, regarding this, in a way, sustainability of trilateral cooperation under the new leadership. So we now all share the concern of sustainability and the momentum of the trilateral cooperation. But now we've already witnessed positive side of the sustaining trilateral cooperation. I mean that already 3 countries held trilateral foreign ministerial meetings 3 times under Trump administration. February in Munich, April in Brussels, and this month in Malaysia. And 3 foreign ministers delivered 2 joint statements on holding, sustaining trilateral cooperation. This is very positive. Marco Rubio, State Secretary Rubio, also strongly committed to enhancing trilateral security cooperation. But I would say that the component of trilateral cooperation, it seems like more like counter-China cooperation than before. And momentum, regarding the momentum of the trilateral cooperation, I think this still momentum arrives. Number one, we're still in a very severe international situation. And then number two, leadership, regarding the leadership, new President Lee Jae-myung repeatedly expressed his hope to sustain trilateral cooperation. And also Prime Minister Ishiba is strongly committed to enhancing trilateral security cooperation. And the number three, as I mentioned earlier, public opinion, especially in Japan and South Korea, strongly support trilateral security cooperation. But at the same time, we needed to address some challenges. Number one, especially regarding the Japan and South Korea relation, we needed to manage history issue. And then number two, we needed to manage the gap between Tokyo and Seoul regarding the policy toward North Korea and China. As Professor Lim mentioned, new Lee Jae-myung administration tried to improve tie with North Korea, and this may give us some negative impact to Japan's security. So we need cross policy coordination, especially between Tokyo and Seoul. And number three, I hopefully Japan and Tokyo and Seoul will make, in a way, joint effort to take more responsibility and burden for constructive and sustainable U.S. commitment in this region. And in addition, I want to say that I really appreciate new President Lee Jae-myung's effort for sustaining improved bilateral relations. Actually, frankly speaking, there has been growing concern, especially in Japan, that the new progressive South Korean government take a pretty tough stance towards Japan. But now we've seen that President Lee show very friendly and positive attitude towards Japan. So I really hope that the bilateral tie between Tokyo and Seoul will contribute to the sustainability of trilateral cooperation. So regarding the Professor Lim's question on the Japan's position regarding the new South Korea's North Korea policy, In my personal view, number one, Japan should respect South Korea's initiative in dealing with North Korea and the inter-Korean initiative, because South Korea is a direct concerned party on the division of Korea. And number two, Japan should appreciate new government effort to reduce military tension on the Korean Peninsula, and this definitely contributes to Japan's security circumstances. But number three, South Korea should not take unilateral action in dealing with North Korea, and need cross-policy coordination with allies and partners, I mean United States and Japan. If these three conditions is satisfied, Japan really appreciates new administration's initiative in improving inter-Korean relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nishino Jr. And thirdly, Professor Ma, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor Hwang. Very constructive comments and questions. But I'm not sure if I can answer all the questions that you have raised, because first of all, well, 2005, 2025, we are several decades distance in terms of time, but it seems to me we have kind of a loop which is very much circulating and not getting ourselves moving forward. That's why I felt a little bit of desperation and despair in our efforts to make unification come true. But at the same time, I feel certain discourses and discussions this time that and suggestions that we better abandon the discussions on reunification itself is probably better than talking about it. And I ponder such kind of proposition as on the one hand, it sounds pretty pragmatic, but on the other hand, I think that kind of proposition is somehow dangerous, because that seems to me a kind of suggestions to abandon the hope for the reunification in the future. I agree that unification of Korean Peninsula is a remote goal and cannot be achieved in the near future. But at the same time, without such a goal, we cannot really achieve anything. Even the prospect for peace, I don't think it's secured with more practical or interim goals that we have. For that reason, I believe peace and unification should go together. Without both, peace is imperfect and unification unattainable. For that reason, I believe peaceful unification should be achieved at the same time. So any formula or questions to prioritize peace over unification or unification over peace, I think it's an untenable proposition. Well, for that reason, I wanted to emphasize peaceful coexistence between North and South can be an interim goal. We may try, but I like to warn probably that's going to be a very much shaky proposition. We should be prepared for the failure of achieving peaceful unification. I'm a little bit concerned with the recent discourse that the Korean government and probably international society in general have to abandon the goal of Korean unification and discard the discourse on unification, because that is basically changing the status quo in Korean Peninsula and also in the Northeast Asia. But without achieving the unification, I believe we cannot really achieve a modicum of peace. What is achievable with the aim of peaceful unification? Peaceful coexistence is a very much precarious peace at the best. Thank you.
Thank you. I think although time is running out, but I think there is time and room for 2 or 3 questions. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand and ask your questions. So those who want to try to ask a question in Korean, just you can ask in Korean and I can deliver your question to the presenters. Okay, you have. Okay. 한국어로 질문하실 분은 한국어로 질문하시면 제가 영어로 질문을 드려볼게요.
Good afternoon. My name is Christian Akane. I'm from Nigeria. Listening to all the panelists, there's one thing that is running through all the discussions, and that is unification of the Korea. My question is there any ideological, political, or even cultural barrier making it difficult for the two Koreas to unite? Looking at it from the time the war took place in the mid-1940s up to now, North Korea can confidently relate with China and confidently relate with Russia. Why is the unification difficult so that it can also relate with South Korea? Thank you.
Okay. Another questions from the floor? Yeah.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 숭실대학교.
So nice to meet you. I'm a student at Sungseo University and I'm doing a PhD. Professor Ma mentioned that reunification is quite difficult to imagine at this moment, and the progress remains quite stagnant. However, from my perspective, whenever we talk about the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, instead of talking about the substance, we only focus on policies and politics. For example, when it comes to the reunification of the Korean Peninsula, the most important factor is North Korean defectors. So North Korean defectors, whenever they are engaged in some kind of discourse about the need of reunification, I think that their comments and their discourse are likely to gain more power in the international community. However, since that is not the case, I think the progress remains quite stagnant.
One more question, the last one, not the least. Okay, nobody? Yeah, then who's gonna first respond to questions? You wanna go?
About what?
Question, you wanna respond to?
What was the second speaker spoke in Korean? I don't know.
Okay, yeah. Maybe the second question was to the Professor Ma. So you want to respond to the first one, or? Actually unclear, but yeah. So North Korea's the relation to China and maybe the relation to the Korea unification issues, and then
on the issue of North Korea's relations with Russia and the Russian role in this situation, and how it affects unification in Korea, it's pretty clear what those two sides are doing. A question arises with China, and where does China fit in this situation? And I tried to characterize it in the presentation as saying China raises some issues, but it basically is cooperative in this endeavor. I don't think there's plenty of evidence that scholars and soldiers and others in China don't like what Russia's been doing, but they don't have. And overall, they're going to sustain it. And the bottom line here for China is that they don't want Russia to lose in Ukraine. So China's interest in this situation is to make sure that Russia doesn't lose. And so the North Koreans are helping to do that. So they'll be supportive, even though they find it complicates their relationships in a lot of different ways. It certainly hardens the policies of Japan and South Korea toward China as well as Russia, and it works against their interests in Europe. But the fundamental interest seems to be this need for another major power that is countering the United States. Because of the calculations of Xi Jinping, that he doesn't want to be alone as a major power confronting the United States. That would be more. He wants to have Russia as another element supporting him. So that's my observation about this triangular relationship. I'm not sure it answers your questions precisely.
Okay, Professor Mar.
Thank you for raising a very important question. I think this touches upon the basic, and very much fundamental policy dilemma that Korean government has. When the government tries to, meet the demands from North Korea to be somehow conciliatory and to facilitate discussions with and dialogue with North Korea, then we may succumb. We have to somehow give up, which very critical for North Korean regime itself, and that I think somehow dysfunctional for us. In providing, in proceeding in inter-Korean or relationship or dialogue with the North Korean regime. I believe without addressing the questions that directly address the touches upon the North Korean people itself, any scheme for reunification is hollow, in my view. Therefore, even if we try to keep talking with North Koreans, our efforts to facilitate the requests from the North Korean people, I think, should have be sustained, in my view. I hope this satisfies your question.
Thank you. I'm really sorry I forgot to deliver the Korean questions in the English. But anyway, because it was given to the Professor Mar, and then the second question was about the role of the North Korean defectors and the role of the North Korean people on the unification. Professor Nishino Jr., you have anything to add or nothing? Okay, so actually time is up, so this is the end of our second panel. Thanks a lot. Please join me thanking all the panelists with the big hands. Thank you.